Chapter 1293. Thank you to Dolu for your tips. I'll add a chapter today. The morning came not early. It was already past 9 o'clock. The sky was just like 6 o'clock in the morning in the eastern region. The sun gently jumped out from the horizon. Poplar Fruit was dressed in white clothes and white pajamas. He stood at the corner of the terrace of the house, looking at the oasis and desert in the east. He was like an ancient swordsman, looking at the beautiful sunrise. If he didn't dance with his sword, he should write a poem. Kiki. However, this elegance was soon broken by Dajuan. A lively little boy ran in from outside, and was about to climb up. Dajuan, you're up so early? Poplar Fruit turned around and smiled at Dajuan. Slow down. Don't fall. Dajuan ran up to the attic, panting slightly, but he was very excited. He looked up and asked, Uncle Poplar Fruit, where's Kiki? She hasn't woken up yet? Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Not yet. She played too late last night, and is still sleeping. The little girl was too excited to watch the stars yesterday, and kept asking her father to tell her stories about the constellations. As a result, she slept a little late, but now it was time to get up. Yonggwa led Dajun inside, and saw a little girl who had kicked away her blanket, and was lying on her stomach. She was sleeping soundly with her limbs spread out. She really treated this place as her own home. Poplar Fruit smiled and pulled the quilt to cover the little girl. He was not afraid that she would catch a cold. His daughter had just kicked the quilt off. It was not cold in the summer morning, but her sleeping posture was too messy. Kiki, wake up. Brother Dajuan is here to play with you. Poplar Fruit said softly. Oh, the little girl was shaken awake by her father. She squinted her eyes and scratched her head. She looked up at Brother Dajuan, who was standing beside her. Kiki, wake up. We're going to play. Dajuan said excitedly. He couldn't wait. Ah. The little girl suddenly remembered how she looked when she had just woken up. She shyly covered herself in the blanket like a coward. Poplar Fruit laughed. As a father, he knew his daughter the best. He smiled and said to Dajun, Dajun, you go find Xian and the others first. I'll help Kiki wash up. All right then. Dajun nodded his head and ran down the stairs. After Yonggwa helped her daughter wash up and change into a light blue floral dress and shoes, Dajun came back when she had her daughter sit on the bed obediently. He was not alone. Nui was also happily following behind him. As soon as the two boys entered the door, they shouted, Kiki, hurry up, let's go play. I saw a lot of sheep yesterday. Dajun suggested. Let me take you to see the sheep. All right. Nui excitedly activated the vibration mode again. Wait for me. Brother Nui, Brother Dajun, wait for me. The little girl stepped on her beautiful pink running shoes and ran out energetically. Even though she was groggy when she woke up and was still a little grumpy, after washing her face with the cool and comfortable well water, Kiki recovered all her energy. Hearing the little girl's crisp and pleasant voice, he was in a good mood. However, Yonggwa was not happy. He happened to be brushing his teeth. When he came out of the bathroom, he only saw his daughter running away with her friends while chatting away. She ran away just like that. Poplar Fruit shook his head. After he finished washing up, he walked out and looked at the photographer. He knew that he wanted to talk about his feelings. What other feelings could he have? Poplar Fruit waved his hand and smiled. I thought that when she was 14, 15, 16, she would go play with the boys and ignore her father. For years old. He shook his head and sighed as he wiped his hands. He even turned his head back and raised 4 fingers. He added sourly, at 4 years old, she was taken away by the boys. The little girl did not abandon her father like that. Yesterday, she had even affectionately confessed her love for her father. However, when he thought of his daughter's happy back, Poplar Fruit could not help but feel a little jealous. Luckily, not long after, Poplar Fruit and the equally disappointed Lin Yongjian set off together to pick up Zhou Shimin and Lu Yi. Kiki and her friends ran back happily and played around by their father's feet. With such a joyous atmosphere in the morning, the cold Kong Kong was infected and joined the group of friends. He was pulled along by Kiki and became the little princess's strong shield. Kiki hid behind Brother Kong Kong and made faces at Nui and the rest. However, there was always a bad person who added trouble and pain to everyone's happy breakfast. At the gathering point for breakfast, as expected, the village chief did not let the fathers have a peaceful breakfast. This time, breakfast still needed to be fought for through games. Let's beat up the village chief together? Lu Yi shook his head and said. Jiejia was an ancient tug-of-war competition. However, unlike tug-of-war, Jiejia was a one-on-one competition. Furthermore, one could not use one's hands to pull the rope. Put this end of the rope around your neck. The fathers followed the village chief's instructions and tried the Jiejia position. Immediately, their faces turned green. What was going on? The rope went past their chest and under their pants. Then they would lie down and pull the rope on all fours like a horse. The position was not a problem, but if they were to pull the rope like that, wouldn't their balls burst? Village chief, you bastard. Before it began, the fathers' faces turned gloomy. They felt their balls tighten and gave the village chief an unfriendly look. They wished that they could switch places with him and let him do it. There was no other way. Variety shows had a life and would never stop tormenting. That was not all. The 5 Uyghur men who were going to compete with the fathers' team actually used a large blanket to wrap their bodies below their heads and walked up in a ball. This meant that even if the fathers were to choose their opponents separately, they would not be able to discern their opponents' physiques and combat strength. Tianji's horse racing idea was immediately crushed. The fathers' team discussed and decided that Lu Yi would be the first to go up. Poplar Fruit would be second, Hu Jun would be third, Lin Yongjian would be fourth, and Zhou Shimin would be last. There was nothing much to say. Let's begin. Unexpectedly, Lu Yi gave his all in the first battle. Although he was a little unsteady at the beginning, he suddenly exerted his strength and quickly defeated his opponent. No. He started pulling me over. In the end, he showed mercy and let me pull him back. Lu Yi held the Uyghur uncle's hand and smiled. However, regardless of whether he betrayed them or not, Lu Yi had won the first round. This was a good sign. Poplar Fruit rubbed his fists and prepared for the next round. Poplar Fruit's strength was unquestionable. Although the people watching were a little nervous, Poplar Fruit believed that he would definitely win. Chapter 1294. Not only did Poplar Fruit want to win, but he also wanted to lay a good foundation for the remaining contestants of his father's team. Since Tianji's horse racing could not be done, Poplar Fruit decided to do the opposite. It would be a king versus king match. When the Uyghur uncle that Lu Yi had chosen walked out, the gap was quickly closed. No one could see it clearly, except for Poplar Fruit. Yonggua's sharp senses allowed him to clearly see the figures of the remaining 4 opponents. Therefore, he had to choose the strongest one among them. This was just like in the romance of the 3 kingdoms. When 2 armies fought, the general, or the strongest general on both sides, would come forward to PK. If Poplar Fruit could defeat the strongest contestant of the opposing team, then it would not only boost the morale of his team, but it would also reduce the pressure on the remaining fathers of his father's team. Therefore, after Poplar Fruit chose his opponent, the Uyghur team looked at each other in surprise. Then, a burly man with a stocky back and a bear's waist walked out. He was definitely not as tall as Poplar Fruit, but it was obvious that Poplar Fruit was not his match in terms of weight. His arms were as thick as Poplar Fruit's thighs. Of course, this was an exaggeration. There was no need for pleasantries. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Poplar Fruit put on the rope and lay down. However, he immediately felt a gentle tugging sensation. It was not caused by his opponent. Poplar Fruit turned around and saw that it was his daughter. Kiki ran over and helped her father hold the rope. She looked like she wanted to help in the tug-of-war. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit paused the match. He smiled and turned around to rub his daughter's head. He looked at the little girl who was worried about her father and said, "It's okay. Daddy can win. There's no need for Kiki to do it." Only then did he coax the little girl back into the audience. He prepared again. Poplar Fruit was not like Lu Yi. His upper body was very low, while his lower body was supported by a pair of long legs. This way, the rope would not strangle his crotch. He didn't want to be in so much pain. Even Poplar Fruit's expression changed when he heard the pain in his crotch. "Listen to my whistle. 3, 2, 1 beep." The village chief's whistle opened the curtains of the second match. "Good luck, Papa." "Go Poplar Fruit." Uncle Poplar Fruit, you can do it! The shouts of both the children and the adults had reached the climax. Meanwhile, the battle between Poplar Fruit and his opponent was still in a tug-of-war. The two of them were actually evenly matched. Of course, Poplar Fruit held back his strength and probed his opponent's depth first. What made him feel regretful was that his opponent's strength was not as strong as he had imagined. He had only used 20% of his strength, but his opponent was already unable to move him. It was no wonder. Poplar Fruit's strength was so great that it had reached an inhuman level. Even Big Bear and the other two true strongmen could contend against him. No matter how strong his opponent was, he was still in the category of a normal human. With this comparison, the difference was huge. He did not think much of it, but his opponent was horrified. His face was as red as blood, and he was unable to move Poplar Fruit at all. Furthermore, he could clearly feel that Poplar Fruit was still doing it with ease. After probing for 2 seconds, Poplar Fruit decided to use his strength. He only used a little strength, and the burly man behind him was pulled back by the rope around his neck. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not use too much strength. Friendship came first, competition came second. If he hurt his opponent, he would not be happy. Yeah, my papa won. Kiki shouted happily, but her voice was already drowned out by everyone's cheers. Poplar Fruit's victory was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. It must be known that Poplar Fruit's opponent was very strong. This surprise of turning defeat into victory greatly boosted the father's team's morale. The third person was Hujun. He was the strongest among the 5 fathers. At first glance, one could tell that he was very powerful and had a lot of fighting power. However, Hujun's opponent was also very strong, although he looked a little older. Sometimes, being strong did not mean that one could win the competition. Take Hujun for example. He was actually in a half-standing position with his hands not touching the ground. The rope was strangling his crotch. It was painful just looking at it. Hujun could not exert any strength at first, and was about to fall back. Suddenly, a shadow flashed beside him. Kong Kong rushed up and grabbed the rope. Whether it was useful or not, the little boy's concern for his father was very touching. Go and help brother Kong Kong. Poplar Fruit did not want to help, so he secretly pushed his daughter. The little girl who received the signal quickly ran over, and followed behind brother Kong Kong, preparing to pull the rope. Seeing that Kiki had already gone up, Xian, Nuai and Dejun did not want to be outdone, and rushed up to help Hujun. One child did not have much strength. 2 children added together did not have much strength, but what about 5 children? In other words, with 4 children, Kiki who was as strong as 2 boys, and Hujun who could still exert a little bit of strength, the rope miraculously stabilized. Senior brother, press your body down. Just now Lu Yi saw Poplar Fruit's performance and secretly learned from it. He quickly taught it to Hujun. Hujun's strength was not bad. After he recovered, he actually succeeded in turning defeat into victory. This could be considered to have created a small miracle. Father's team won 3 consecutive victories. For a moment, cheers and laughter filled the air. The morale was at its peak. It even gave people the feeling that they were going to win 5 consecutive victories. Even Lin Yongjian, who was about to go on stage, was smiling brightly. It was as if he was going to win the competition before he even went on stage. Indeed, the audience was also looking forward to father's team creating a miracle. Although Lin Yongjian was the weakest out of the 5 fathers, one should not forget that he was the only one out of the 4 fathers who had won the mud-carrying competition in Min Province, who said that a black hole in the game would never have a chance to turn things around. Moreover, Lin Yongjian's opponent did not seem to be very strong. It was not as strong as the previous few. Could it be that there was a chance? There was really no chance. In the face of strength, there was no such thing as luck. Lin Yongjian was, after all, old. Moreover, Teacher Lin was the type who did not like to exercise. He was pulled back in an instant. Even if the 5 children went on stage to help again, there was no way they could win the competition. Lin Yongjian lost. It was not unexpected. However, he was also very magnanimous. He laughed loudly and hugged his opponent. The last to go on stage was the equally strong Zhou Shimin. Although he did not have the help of the children, the village chief had stopped the children from cheating. He relied on the explosive strength in his body. After stabilizing his body, he suddenly exerted force and directly dragged his opponent to the finish line. There was no 5 consecutive victories, but father's team achieved a rare victory of 4-1. This could be said to be a miracle. So much so that when they were eating breakfast, everyone was still happily discussing this matter. "Papa, where are we going next?" After witnessing the great battle of their fathers, the children were also excited and enthusiastically welcomed the next challenge. Chapter 1295. Following that, it was time for the Truth or Truth Challenge segment. The production team found an excuse to separate the children from the fathers. The fathers went to the comfortable monitoring room and sat or lay down on the big Kong bed. They watched as the children were brought into the mission room one by one to be interrogated by Uncle Afundi, who was disguised as them. "This is the first time I've seen a broad and fat Afundi." Poplar Fruit smiled and gestured to the other fathers. "In the cartoons we watched in the past, Afundi was very thin, right? I feel that the village chief is more suitable to act as Master Bai." The first child was brought into the room. The fathers saw from the big screen that the person who opened the door was Xian. The father who was not his child was still happily talking and laughing, but Zhou Shimin, who was his son, was clearly a little nervous. It was different from before. This time, the village chief used black technology. He introduced it to Xian. "This is a very angry hat invented by the village chief. When it's the truth, it won't light up. When it's a lie, it will light up." This toy was obviously fake. Whether it would light up or not depended on whether the village chief pressed a hidden button in his hand. However, the children would not be like the adults and think that it was fake just by looking at the rough workmanship. They would first believe the village chief's words. Then, like Xian, they would begin to feel nervous. Although he was quite honest, little chubby Xian would still occasionally lie. After a few rounds of answers, Xian completely believed that the machine would detect his lies. Hence, he suddenly revealed a secret. "Dad used a belt to hit me." In the monitoring room, the fathers were all surprised. Lu Ye's reaction was even more exaggerated. His mouth was wide open and he had a look of shock. Of course, Poplar Fruit had also experienced being beaten by his father when he was young. However, even if he was born in the countryside, his father had never used a belt to hit him, let alone a city child who was spoiled. Even Poplar Fruit, who was born in the countryside, had never been hit by his father with a belt. Even an adult would not be able to take a beating from a belt. "You really used a belt?" Hu Jun asked with a smile. "I used this to scare him." Zhou Shimin laughed. He moved his 2 hands closer and stretched out to demonstrate. This was not called hitting. It was just the sound of the belt to scare the child. Of course, Xian was still a very cute and honest child. He honestly explained the reason. "I was the one who hit my brother first." Little chubby Xian himself knew that this was wrong. During the test, every child was guided by the village chief to show their truest side. What touched his father and the audience was that the 5 children were all very kind and pure. Their hearts were like a piece of beautiful jade. Xian said that the reason why he didn't like his mother kissing his father was because he wanted his father and mother to kiss him. He would also be happy for his little brother to be kissed by his parents because that was his little brother. It was the same for Dejun. During the village chief's question and answer session, Dejun nearly made his father cry. He was touched. Hu Jun and the other 3 fathers had a whole new level of respect for her. "I like Daddy, I like you very much." Even though the village chief had turned on the light of the lie detector machine, Dejun still said firmly, "I like it when I smoke, and I like it when I don't smoke." "If he is sick, will you still take care of him?" The village chief's question was the key to pushing this feeling to the peak. "I will. I don't allow him to smoke, but he still smokes. If he doesn't listen to you, are you still willing to take care of him?" "I'm still willing." Dejun did not hesitate. At this moment, the monitoring room was silent. Lin Yongjian was holding back his tears. Anyone could see that he was touched. Thinking about Dejun's performance this time, it was much better than the previous 2 trips. Did he use some kind of technique? That's not it. From the program, we could see that the dialogue between Dejun and the village chief was very simple. It came from the bottom of their hearts. The reason why the fathers and the audience had a whole new level of respect for Dejun was because the village chief had really peeled off Dejun's heart. He had brought out his sincerity and kindness that had been ignored by everyone. And all of this was Dejun's original, genuine personality. The third was Kong Kong. To be honest, the fathers were very confident in Kong Kong. Lu Yi even said that Kong Kong's performance was the best. Poplar Fruit also said, "Right, I feel that Kong Kong is very, very sensible and smart." Poplar Fruit really liked this child who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Not necessarily. Hu Jun laughed heartily. He made a motion of taking off his hat and said, "If things don't go well, Kong Kong will say, 'This game is too childish.' Puts down hat. Let's go." Kong Kong entered the door. Under the village chief's greeting, she put on the lie detector hat. Kong Kong's expression is very calm. She was not affected by the village chief or the environment. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. In comparison, the two children in front seemed a little nervous. However, they were not. Kong Kong was also nervous. After hearing the village chief's description of the lie detector machine, Kong Kong began to cover her ears. Not only was she afraid of the noise, but she was also worried that she would be found out if she was lying. "Do you like Dad?" Towards this question, Kong Kong was the first to answer that she did not like him. She was very honest and very firm. "Why don't you like him? Has he hit you before? Has he been fierce to you?" The village chief's question immediately made Hu Jun, who had been teasing the other fathers in a relaxed manner, sit up straight. Kong Kong said weakly no. The village chief did not press the button, but asked, "Is it true?" Kong Kong really did as Hu Jun said. He took off his hat and said, "Forget it, I'm not going to try it." The little boy's voice was still very calm, but he was indeed a little nervous. However, at this time, the monitoring room was already filled with laughter. The fathers were clapping and laughing. Some of them were laughing because of Hu Junshin's guess, and some were praising Kong Kong's wit. Kong Kong used such a way to express the fact that his father had indeed adopted a strict way of educating his son. In fact, Kong Kong was still alright. Although he had been challenging his father's nerves, the other fathers, and the audience's jokes, for example, holding a knife, chopping off my hand. Zhou Shimon's scaring was nothing compared to this. Another example was choosing the airplane Lego over the company of his father. However, Kong Kong still showed his emotional side. With Lego and a father, he's happier this way. After saying this, Hu Jun began to quiet down and reflect on whether he had done something wrong. "I think Kong Kong has actually grown up," Poplar Fruit suddenly said. He was a teacher and had taught elementary school children before, so he had a better understanding of children's psychology. He thinks more, so sometimes he is more rational in some aspects. Hu Jun looked over in confusion. Poplar Fruit smiled slightly. He gestured up with his two palms and continued. In his heart, he actually wants Brother Hu's company. This should be ranked above the toys. But why doesn't he choose the answer he desires the most? Right, why? Because he understands that it's impossible for you to sacrifice your job to stay with him. Poplar Fruit said softly. So after suppressing his feelings for a long time, he rationally tells himself that the best choice should not be the one he desires the most. Was this deception? No, this was also sincerity. Chapter 1296. After Kong Kong went out, Poplar Fruit suddenly became nervous. It was completely different from the calm expression he had when he was analyzing the children's psychological problems with Hu Jun. Because the fourth one would be Kiki's turn. "You're nervous too?" Zhou Shimon patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and smiled. Now that the children who were questioned by the village chief were brought to lunch, there was nothing for them to worry about. Thus, Zhou Shimon was now very relaxed. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded his head, generously admitting, "Of course, in our country, the exams are all for the children and parents, right? It's normal to be nervous." He wasn't nervous about his own exams, but now that his daughter was going to be tested, he became nervous. Will Kiki be too scared to go in? Lin Yongjian asked. This house is dark, and there's a strange person inside. It shouldn't be. Don't look at Kiki as a girl. She's actually quite brave. Poplar Fruit smiled. Moreover, with the village chief inside, she won't feel scared. There was one thing that Poplar Fruit didn't say. He felt that with his daughter's intelligence, she might be able to see through the authenticity of the village chief's machine. For a little girl who could recite the first 2 seasons of the show, pointing out the flaws of the show was a very easy task. But sometimes, it's not good to be too smart. Poplar Fruit was a little worried, because if she was too smart, she might stand out from the crowd and make the audience feel disgusted. Creak. On the screen, a white and tender hand pushed open the door, and a little girl with a cute ponytail walked in. Ni hao, beautiful little girl. Welcome to Afundi's house. The village chief began to act mysterious again, using a strange tone to say. Kiki didn't immediately walk up, because the person in front of her was still very unfamiliar. She stood at the door and looked at the village chief in confusion. No matter how she looked at him, she felt that he was very familiar. Come, come, come. Please take a seat. The village chief stroked his non-existent mustache, chuckled, and invited Kiki to take a seat. Kiki's eyes suddenly lit up. She giggled and pointed at the village chief. I know, you're not Afundi, you're the village chief. All right, you found out. The village chief also smiled mischievously, and did not continue to speak with that strange accent. He guided the little girl who had lowered her guard, and walked over to sit on the seat opposite him. Look, this is my latest invention. The village chief played with the big hat, and repeated the words he used to fool the other children. So powerful? Chief, are you a scientist? Kiki looked at the village chief with admiration. I know. The village chief is the same as Slow Yang Yang. They are both super amazing inventors. However, village chief, you don't have a white beard. Your beard is black. What a mess. The village chief was interrupted. He stared blankly and helplessly changed the topic again, putting the machine on Kiki. At first, Kiki withdrew her hand in fear. She looked pitifully at the village chief and said, Village chief, I'm scared. She was afraid that it would hurt. It won't hurt. There's cotton padding inside. Look, it doesn't hurt even when you pinch it like this. The village chief demonstrated, and even showed his fingers to Kiki. Only then did the little girl obediently put on the equipment. It really doesn't hurt. Kiki nodded and giggled. Seeing his daughter's performance, Poplar Fruit relaxed a little. At least she didn't mess up this game of truth. From this, it could be seen that although the little girl was very smart, but in front of adults she was familiar with, she would easily believe the words of adults. She didn't have independent thinking and lacked the initiative to distinguish truth from lies. This wasn't a good thing, but for a 4-year-old child, and a girl at that, one couldn't expect too much, right? All right, let's start our questions, shall we? The village chief said with a smile. First question, do you think the village chief is handsome? Haha. In the monitoring room, the fathers all clapped their hands and laughed. They were all talking about Lu Ye's suggestion to ask this question. As expected, the little girl who liked to support nodded and said, handsome. Then the hat on her head lit up and made a sound. The little girl understood what this meant. She smiled embarrassedly and was so shy that she didn't dare to look at the village chief. All right, I'll ask again. Do you think the village chief is handsome? The village chief smiled. Not handsome. Kiki stuck out her tongue and smiled embarrassedly. The little girl was very kind. She hurriedly added, But village chief, don't be sad. Although you're not handsome, you're a good person. This was 100 times the critical hit. In the monitoring room, the fathers were rolling around on the Kong bed with laughter. The audience helped to say what was in their hearts. The village chief was actually given the good person card by the 4-year-old my daughter. Although you're not handsome, you're a good person. The little girl would occasionally say golden sentences. It was believed that after this episode was broadcast, this would become a popular phrase on the internet. Kiki did not understand why the village chief was clutching his chest in pain after she comforted him. She was worried that the village chief would be sad, so she gave a final explanation. Luckily, the village chief was just pretending. In a blink of an eye, the village chief recovered his smile and said, Thank you, baby. Hearing you say that, the village chief is very happy. He prepared to ask the next question. Village chief, can I ask you for a favor? Kiki suddenly said. The village chief was surprised and asked, What is it? Chi-Chi giggled a little embarrassedly and said, that's right, that's right. Can the village chief also call me Chi-Chi from now on? Darling isn't my nickname anymore. Papa calls me Kiki. The village chief keenly grasped this question. He felt that there should be something interesting to reveal. He smiled and asked, whose nickname is Baby? It's Mama Ma. Kiki replied indifferently. Mama Ma has the word Bay in her name. After saying that, she smiled sweetly. She did not know that she had told the village chief some of her family's little secrets. Oh, then does Daddy call Mommy Baby at home? The village chief inherited the paparazzi's fine tradition and asked to get to the bottom of it. In the monitoring room, Poplar Fruit had already covered his forehead. Hearing the laughter of the other fathers next to him, he lamented in his heart, silly girl, you sold your father out. No. Kiki revealed the truth. She smiled and said, Papa calls Mama Ma Baby. Yo. In the monitoring room, the four unscrupulous fathers made a strange sound at the same time. They pushed Poplar Fruit, who was covering his face, and laughed. The meaning of ridicule was self-evident. After this video was broadcasted, it also aroused the discussion of netizens. There was a point of view that they were most interested in. Poplar Fruit has two daughters. One is called Yang Luoqi, and the other is called Fang Beibei. Chapter 1297. No one would have thought that the extremely intelligent Kiki would divulge a secret. However, this was also very normal. All children were like this, including Kong Kong, who also said a lot. After all, they regarded the village chief as a reliable and close friend. Poplar Fruit's eyelids twitched. He felt that his daughter was going to cheat him again. Do you love Daddy? I love Papa. I love him very much. The little girl said with a smile. This question, for the little girl, would never need to think because there was only one answer. If Daddy kissed Mommy, would you feel unhappy? The village chief asked with a smile. Why would I feel unhappy? Kiki blinked strangely. She did not understand what the village chief meant. Because Daddy kissed Mommy, but not you. The village chief said. I will say, Papa, I also want a kiss. Kiki giggled. Then Papa will kiss me. The answer was irrelevant, but just like the little girl's happy mood at the moment, the little girl did not feel unhappy at all. Then does Daddy kiss Mommy more or Kiki more? The village chief continued to ask. In fact, the village chief asked a lot of questions, but most of them would be edited in the program, leaving only the children's amazing words. So far, the village chief only pressed Kiki's helmet once, but it seemed that the little girl was very honest. The village chief probably did not have many opportunities to play. Just now he had asked a lot of questions about Kiki's family. The village chief decided to ask Kiki some questions about herself. Do you like kindergarten? The village chief asked. This question he asked a lot of children before, such as Xian Xian and Dejun. Under the village chief's guidance, they all said their own thoughts. Indeed, most children do not like to be restrained by teachers in kindergarten. What would Kiki say? I like it. Kiki nodded. However, the village chief pressed the lie detector, and Kiki's hat rang again. She said, Aya, and touched the hat on her head in confusion. The fathers laughed, but Poplar Fruit didn't. He frowned and said, That's not right. This Kiki isn't lying. She really likes kindergarten. Similarly, Kiki also looked at the village chief in confusion. She was very innocent and confused. Kiki likes to go to kindergarten? The village chief asked again. Yes, I like kindergarten. I like to play with my friends. Kiki nodded. She felt that she was not lying. Her big eyes were filled with sincerity and confusion. It's true. Village chief, please check it. The village had thought of a way to cover up his lie. He pretended to fiddle with the machine and said, Oh, the village head wants to apologize to Kiki. Because the village head's invention malfunctioned. It made a wrong judgment just now. Kiki, can you forgive me? It's okay. Village chief, don't be sad. Slow Yang Yang also often develops disobedient machines. Chi-Chi nodded. The kind-hearted little girl stretched out her little hand to comfort the village chief. She pressed on the village chief's arm and said, Daddy said that failure is the mother of success, so village chief, you will definitely succeed. What the hell was this? He was actually being lectured by a 4-year-old child. The village chief was touched and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He patted the little girl's hand and said, "Thank you, Kiki. The village head will continue to work hard." In the monitoring room, the fathers were all laughing. Lu Yi clapped his hands and laughed until he couldn't breathe. He said, "Ayo, I'm dying of laughter. Poplar fruit, Kiki is too talented. Failure is mama of success." "All right, village chief, I have another question." The village chief said, "No one is perfect. Everyone has flaws and there are things that they don't do well. Then Kiki, what do you think is the thing that you want Daddy to correct the most?" Poplar fruit immediately became spirited. He crossed his legs and focused on watching. Kiki held her cheeks and looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. This question seemed to be a little difficult for her. "In other words, what do you think is Daddy's biggest flaw?" the village chief asked. "Daddy has no flaws." The little girl waved her hand. She pouted and said sullenly, But I really want Daddy to accompany me more." No one would have thought that Kiki, who accompanied her father the most, would say such words. "Is it because Daddy is often not at home?" the village chief asked. Kiki shook her head like a rattledrum. She denied it and said, "No, it's because Daddy sometimes has to go on business trips and then he leaves me at home." "What's the difference between this and not being at home often?" The village chief didn't understand. But Yanghua understood. He suddenly felt a sense of loss on his daughter's little face. What kind of feeling was that? Daddy left you at home and went on a business trip, so Kiki is very disappointed, right? The village chief tried to understand Kiki's thoughts. "That's right. In the past, Papa would take Chi-Chi out to play." The little girl nodded. She didn't know if it was because of the accumulation of emotions, but the little girl actually said with red eyes, I don't want to leave Daddy." "But Daddy's business trip is also for work. If he takes you out, won't he also have no time to accompany you?" The village chief tried to ease Kiki's mind. He analyzed to Kiki, "If he takes Kiki out, Daddy will have to take care of you. This will bring a lot of inconvenience to his work." "I know, Mama told me." Kiki pursed her lips and said, "So I need to learn to be independent and not bring trouble to Daddy." If it was said that Kiki suddenly came up with such an idea, all the fathers didn't expect it, but at this moment, Kiki showed understanding, which was beyond everyone's imagination. "Poplar fruit, to be honest, although I'm older than you by more than 10 years, I envy you for having such a sensible daughter," Lin Yongjian suddenly said. At this moment, Poplar fruit was completely silent. Later, Poplar fruit seriously said in an interview with the program group, "This is my lack of consideration. As parents, sometimes we do take things for granted. I think that she has grown up and doesn't need to stick to Daddy anymore. I think that she can understand Daddy's difficulties in leaving her at home. I think that with Mommy accompanying her and calling her every night, she can feel relieved." Actually, that's not the case. Children have their own point of view. She likes me to take her wherever I go, because it's always been like this before. Adults can rationally leave space for each other, but children will magnify this grievance. Kiki has already restrained herself very well, but I didn't notice it. "Where are you going, Daddy?" Kiki told me before that the reason why she wants to participate in this program is because she can travel with Daddy, complete tasks together, and grow together. Really, I'm very grateful to this program, which made me realize my shortcomings as a father. Chapter 1298. Back in the show, Poplar Fruit was still looking at the big screen and reflecting on himself. Kiki didn't feel bad for too long. The little girl was originally an optimist. After chatting with the village chief for a while, she began to happily talk about other things. All right, that's the best question. In order to enlighten her, the village chief looked for a question that she was more interested in. He smiled and asked, "In kindergarten, do you think you are the most beautiful girl in your class?" Everyone thought that with the little girl's personality, she would nod her head. She often talked to the camera and asked the camera if she was beautiful. Besides, Kiki was so beautiful. Even if she nodded her head, no one would think that she was vain. Not to mention in Kiki's class, in the past 3 seasons, even in so many parent-child shows, it was difficult to find my daughter who was prettier than Kiki. But Kiki was stunned for a moment, and shook her head. No, the village chief asked in surprise. He had already made a mistake once before, and didn't dare to mess around again. Kiki was a very opinionated child. No way. The village chief thinks that you should be the prettiest. No, Julia, Ran, Xiao, and many of my good friends are very beautiful. Kiki seriously defended her friends. Also, I don't want to be the prettiest girl. Kiki said very seriously. Only a bad queen wants to be the prettiest girl. Dad said that I want to learn from Snow White. Snow White has a beautiful heart, so she has many good friends. You even told this to the child? Zhou Shimin asked Poplar Fruit in surprise. It must be known that these principles were difficult for even elementary school students to understand. Children's minds were simple, so when parents educated them, they rarely talked about principles. Instead, they directly told them what was good and what wasn't. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, I only told her once in a while. I didn't expect her to remember. Actually, this matter had to be explained from the time Kiki participated in the kindergarten drama. At that time, after the Kiki performance, many parents told the Poplar Fruit that Kiki was really beautiful in front of her. Some even said that Kiki was the prettiest. After coming back, the little girl smiled happily for the whole night. Feng Beibei was worried that the little fellow would be too proud, and that she would be isolated in kindergarten because of her pride. So she asked Poplar Fruit to chat with Kiki about life before going to bed. Poplar Fruit chatted with Kiki very skillfully. He used the story of Snow White that he had just performed and was still very popular. He told her that beauty was a wonderful thing, but if she deliberately pursued beauty and deliberately wanted to be the most beautiful person, she would become a bad person like the Witch Queen. Poplar Fruit also told Kiki that a good child should learn from Snow White. The reason why Snow White had so many good friends and Prince Charming liked her was because her heart was pure and beautiful. Poplar Fruit gave some examples of Snow White helping the dwarves to cook, make the bed, wash the clothes, and clean the house. Chi-Chi might not be able to accept it very smoothly if he were to directly explain the great principle, but through Snow White's story, the little girl easily understood her father's meaning, and also understood this great principle somewhat exaggeratedly. Therefore, after one night, the little girl returned to her usual well-behaved and lovely self, and was not affected by those praises. Of course, if everyone said that she was beautiful, the little girl would still be very happy. She would still bashfully smile for a while in her father's arms, but that was only because she cared about her appearance and did not want to compare herself with others. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not expect that his daughter would remember the things he told her so clearly, especially the sentence of the queen, which left the deepest impression on the little girl. Poplar Fruit did not know if this was due to him or the fairy tale. After receiving the village chief's praise, Kiki left happily. The Vitality Girl did not have the grievance of being on the verge of tears. Under the camera, she cheered and ran towards the place where the director said her good friends would gather. The cameraman could not keep up, and could only watch from afar as the pair of fair and long legs ran away. Next, there was still the last Nuai. Among the 5 children, the most difficult one to grasp was Nui. Just like what his father said, he's very easy to fly. Nuoyi's way of thinking could be said to be unconstrained. Often, while you were still lingering on a topic, he would have already jumped to another story. Of course, in traditional Chinese classrooms, the evaluation of such children was very bad. They felt that they were restless, or they were described as hyperactive. But from another perspective, or from the perspective of a more tolerant Western classroom, weren't these children also very active and creative? For example, Nui would often use the village chief's words as a reference to the world of Journey to the West. If the first few children brought about touching feelings, warmth, and even surprise for Kiki, then what Nui brought to the audience was uncontrollable laughter. For example, when the village chief asked Nui if he had seen Guanyin Bodhisattva, even if the village chief lit up the helmet and made a fuss a few times, Nui still firmly said that he had seen her. Why did he say that he had seen her? Because he had seen Sanya's Southern Sea Guanyin. That was a statue of more than 100 meters tall. From the perspective of a child, this statue of Guanyin was undoubtedly the real Guanyin Bodhisattva. Of course, the village chief was also cursing in his heart. Are you fucking kidding me? But from a child's point of view, Nuoi was indeed not lying. However, following that, when the village chief asked if he liked his father, his hand trembled and accidentally lit up the helmet. This triggered a hidden plot that made the audience burst out in laughter. So when Nuoi said that he liked his father, it was a lie. Lu Ye's suspicions in the monitoring room had been slapped in the face. Why was it a lie? Under the village chief's questioning, he found out that Nuoi was sad because his father liked his younger sister more. With regards to this, he was very certain. Why does father like his younger sister more? Asked the village chief. Sure enough, Nuoi once again gave an answer that made people convulse with laughter. Because his younger sister is also his son. The boy was not only face blind, he was also gender blind. He was so silly that he could not differentiate between a son and a daughter. Of course, after the laughter, the village chief began to stir up emotions. Under his guidance, Nuoi showed his sensible and filial side. What do you want your father to become? A happy father, a real father. When your father is old, lying in bed and unable to move, will you still love him? I don't love him anymore. Behind the shocking words, there was indeed an indescribable pain, because he will die. Although he said that he did not love him, his heart was filled with reluctance and longing. He would send his father to the hospital and take good care of him. Nuoi shed tears. In the monitoring room, Lu Yi was also moved to tears. If not for so many fathers watching, he would probably have also shed tears. Aren't you looking down on your child? Poplar Fruit patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile. Although the Q&A had ended, the fathers all went to have lunch. However, in their hearts, they wanted to see their children more. After listening to their thoughts, even Poplar Fruit wanted to talk to their children. Chapter 1299. In the morning, there was only a small program in the Grape Gully, but in the afternoon, they spent their time in the car. After resting for a few hours, the environment suddenly changed, and they came to the Wulistaili Ranch in Uristali. Although it was called a ranch, it was no different from a prairie. Although there wasn't the magnificent scenery of cattle and sheep in the wind, the endless grasslands and rolling green hills still amazed these city children. Papa, is this the Hulumber Prairie? The little girl asked excitedly. She had transmigrated to the second season, which was also a beautiful prairie. No, that one is in Inner Mongolia, and we are now in Xinjiang. Poplar Fruit laughed. This conversation was not recorded by the program crew, because the sponsors were different. The fathers took their children and stood in a row. Then they arrived in advance. The village chief, who was dressed as a local, rode a tall horse and led the Kazakh villagers in front of the children. The welcome of the Kazakh people was different from what they had seen in the past. They sang and danced, and there was no custom of forcing people to drink. However, everyone was wearing their best national costumes to welcome them. What made the children very happy was that a Kazakh ant threw candy in front of them. Papa, I want to eat, I want to eat. Kiki, this greedy little cat, picked up a candy and couldn't help but pull her father's hand, asking him to help her tear open the candy wrapper and eat it happily. As usual, the village chief sat on the tall horse and said a few words of welcome in a strange tone. Then, without any transition, the village chief announced the first task of the day in the prairie. Snatch a house. How to snatch a house. The village chief pointed at the prairie about 1 kilometer away. There were so many white tents, which were scattered there like an astrolabe. However, there were only 5 houses arranged by the program crew. According to the village chief, the houses were divided into 5 levels. The good ones were very good, and the bad ones were probably not better than the 3 houses Poplar Fruit stayed in yesterday. If they wanted to snatch a good house, they had to work hard together with the children. Whoever ran there first would be able to snatch the house they wanted. When the village chief was talking, Poplar Fruit was already rubbing his hands, laughing, and doing warm-up exercises with his legs spread. Poplar Fruit is already starting to run. The village chief pointed at Poplar Fruit and laughed at the fathers. Immediately, The other fathers followed suit and started twisting their arms. My axe is thirsty. Poplar Fruit laughed. Village chief, bring it on. She wasn't sure if she could rely on luck, but if she relied on her physical fitness to get a good house, Yang Guo was still very confident. Following the village chief's order, the fathers took their children and dashed out like arrows, leaving the bow. Of course, this was also an exaggeration. With a child, it was impossible to speed up. Zo, poplar, 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 poplar. I can't run anymore. Daddy, carry me. Xian whined as she ran. Short legs, slightly plump and curly hair. They were trying their best to jump on this grassland that was higher than his knees. It looked quite distressing. However, little chubby Xian wasn't such a useless child. Listening to his cries, he was full of energy and didn't even pant. One could tell that he was just lazy and wanted his father to carry him. His father hugged his younger brother and not him. Although little chubby Xian wasn't particularly jealous, he still felt that it was unfair. But how could Zhou Shimin carry him? Even though Xian and Hao Hao were only 3 years old and 2 years old respectively, the two of them were still very heavy. Xian was even heavier than Kiki and Nuyi, who were much taller than him. Jogging while carrying Hao Hao was already very strenuous for Zhou Shimin. The main reason was that he was tired. After all, he practiced boxing, which required explosive power, and not long-distance running, which required endurance. Let's not talk about Zhou Shimin's side. Poplar Fruit and Kiki were running very fast. In the beginning, Poplar Fruit was still carrying his daughter and running. They didn't leave any traces on the grass, as if they were running on flat ground. It was as if they were riding on a small electric scooter. But this position made Kiki very uncomfortable. Poplar Fruit could only put the little girl down. It had to be said that Kiki's athletic ability was still very good. The frequency of her steps was very fast. In addition to her slender legs, her strides were also very fast. Kiki and her father were far ahead and ran in front of all the children. I like it here. Daddy, I like it here. The little girl giggled as she ran. She was afraid that her father couldn't hear her clearly, so she said it a second time. Poplar Fruit knew that his daughter didn't have the heart to compete for the house. The reason why she was running so happily was because the feeling of running in this endless grassland was too comfortable. Just like a horse, the wider the place, the more they liked it. And Kiki, who liked speed and nature, was also the same. Running in this grassland, feeling the soft grass, enjoying the comfortable breeze, and looking at the rolling and vast green. No wonder she laughed so happily all the way. In the blue sky, white clouds float. Under the white clouds, horses run. Poplar Fruit was actually the same. He also liked the grassland. As he ran, he also became excited. As if he was reciting a poem, he recited the grassland ballad. Daddy, what are you talking about? The little girl still couldn't understand. She ran while giggling and asked, Daddy is singing. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, nonsense. You don't sing well, hee hee. The little girl mischievously ran away. In the laughter, Poplar Fruit and his daughter unknowingly completed a long-distance run. Kiki actually persisted. Room number 1. If it wasn't for the flag fluttering in the wind with the word number 1, Poplar Fruit wouldn't know that this was room number 1. It was just a pile of grass. How could it be called a room? Speaking of which, yesterday's room was not the worst. This one was right? Of course, Poplar Fruit saw the tent parts next to it and knew what was going on. Poplar Fruit took his daughter's hand and walked straight through the first pile of grass. Only the little girl curiously looked at it. However, when they arrived at room number 2, Kiki threw that curiosity to the back of her mind. Wow, Daddy, this house is so beautiful. The little girl exclaimed in surprise. At this time, Kiki's vocabulary was still somewhat lacking. She remembered some of the praises she heard before, but she didn't know how to use them. But Kiki's praise was correct. This yurt was too spacious, at least 40 square meters. Moreover, the floor was covered with a wool blanket, and the bed was clean and tidy. The big bed was also very stylish. Yesterday, Lu Ye's big bed that could sleep more than a dozen people was not as big as this one. Do you like it here? Poplar Fruit touched his daughter's head and asked with a smile. Chapter 1300. Really? Can we live here? Kiki looked at her father happily and asked. When she was looking at the room, Kiki also found a lot of strange things hanging on the wall, which attracted Kiki's attention. Since we all think that this place is good, then we will live here. Poplar Fruit laughed, but at the same time, we will lose the opportunity to choose other rooms. Don't regret it. I won't regret it. I like the second room very much. Kiki happily jumped around the room and said. To be honest, Poplar Fruit felt that the next 3 rooms were not necessarily better than the second yurt he chose. After all, it was so luxurious and seemed to be the best match. But Poplar Fruit was still very happy with his daughter's attitude. He wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and tell his daughter the story of a monkey losing a watermelon to pick up sesame. Poplar Fruit, have you guys already chosen? Lu Yi and Nuai were second. They had also arrived. When they walked in to take a look, they realized that Chi-Chi was already living here. Brother Nuai, can you come to my house to play? Kiki and Nuai's good friends laughed and played together. Good, good. Nui danced with joy, beaming with joy. Don't say okay. Lu Yi quickly dragged his son whose heart was already held by Kiki and said, we still have to find our own room. Later, we will find Kiki to play. After that, Lu Yi dragged Nuai and left in a hurry. The rest of the fathers were about the same. First it was Dajuan and Lin Yongjian. Then it was Kong Kong and Hu Jun. When they passed by Yangguo's door, they all stopped to take a look. Then they continued to walk to the back to look for their own house. Poplar Fruit happily greeted them. It felt like a noble master was about to invite guests to his family's dinner party. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit remembered something. 5 pairs of father and son, he chose the second one. The third pair would be chosen from the 3rd to the 5th. That left only Zhou Shimin and his son who had to take care of their youngest son, Hao Hao. Then they had no choice? All that was left was the most arduous pile of grass, number 1. If it was the previous 2 trips, Poplar Fruit would not think about Zhou Shimin's family. But this time he brought along a little burden. Xianxian was already the youngest. Now there was an even younger one. No matter how he looked at it, Zhou Shimin had enough. Yangguo frowned. She walked to the door of the yurt and looked in the original direction. It wasn't easy to take care of Hao Hao. Zhou Shimin hadn't come over yet. On the other hand, the village chief was riding a tall horse and carrying little chubby Xianxian happily. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and called his daughter over. He squatted down and let his daughter sit on his lap and said, Kiki, did you see Xianxian's father? I saw him. Kiki was confused by her father's question. She nodded in confusion and did not understand what her father wanted to say. Xianxian's father has to take care of 2 children today, Xianxian and Hao Hao. Xianxian is only 3 years old and Hao Hao is even younger. He is only 2 years old. Poplar Fruit said to his daughter, this is very difficult. You know, Hao Hao is not as obedient as you were when you were 2 years old. Then Uncle Zhou Shimin is very pitiful. The little girl nodded kindly and said, Then Daddy, can we help him? I also want to help him, but there is one thing that I want Kiki to understand. Poplar Fruit rubbed his daughter's head lovingly and said with a smile, Xianxian's father walks so slowly. They can't find a good house and can only sleep here. Yangguo pointed at the haystack. She didn't beat around the bush and directly said to her daughter, But Hao Hao is so young. He can't live in such an environment. He will get sick at night. So Dad, do you want us to change houses with Xianxian's family? Chi-Chi was stunned for a moment. Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter's expression and explained, We will give Xianxian the second room, and then we will live in the first room, okay? Okay. The little girl nodded and was very straightforward. Poplar Fruit's prepared persuasion words were all blocked. Poplar Fruit was stunned. He did not expect his daughter to be so easy to persuade. Is it really okay? Poplar Fruit asked again with concern. If we change to the first room, we won't be as comfortable as the second room, and then we will have to sleep on the haystack. Are you willing to give up such a beautiful house? I like the second room very much, but I don't want Xianxian's daddy to be sad. Kiki took her father's hand and frowned slightly. She said with a compassionate look, Hao Hao's brother is here for the first time, and he also wants to live in a good house with his daddy. If he lives in the first room, he will cry. It turned out that the little girl had considered Hao's brother's feelings. Poplar Fruit was moved and kissed his daughter on the forehead. He said with a smile, "Then we will give them the second room." Poplar Fruit stood up and went back to the second room to take out his bag. Then he took his daughter's hand and went to the haystack in the first room. Poplar Fruit put his backpack on it, patted the haystack, and said to his daughter with a smile, "It's not bad. It's soft and very comfortable." Kiki raised her head and looked at the sky. She raised her arms happily as if she wanted to hug the blue sky and asked, "Papa, can we see the stars at night?" "Of course, what's wrong? Haven't you seen enough?" Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and asked with a smile. Seeing the little girl nod her head, Yonghua laughed heartily and picked up her daughter. She pointed at the comfortable pile of grass and said, "Chi-Chi, look, we can lie here tonight. When we open our eyes, they will be filled with stars. There's nothing to hide, it's all there." Kiki had been fascinated by the beautiful scene described by her father. Looking at her sparkling eyes, she liked it very much. On the other side, the village chief finally arrived with Xian Xian on a tall horse. Xian Xian was carried down by Yonghua. Chi-Chi was very curious and envious. When the village chief asked her, she excitedly asked her father to carry her up and happily rode off with the village chief. Poplar Fruit took Xuanxuan's hand and pointed to the big yurt to Zhou Shimin, who just came with his little son, and said with a smile, "Brother Zhou, this is your room." "Our room? It's the last room, and there's still such a good room?" Zhou Shimin looked around and asked in surprise. At this time, Hu Jun came from behind. Together with Kong Kong, he took the things and placed them on Yonggua's haystack. He also said to Zhou Shimin, "Shimin, this room 1 is ours. Your room is at the back, and it's a carriage room. Xian Xian should like it. Take him to see it." This time, Zhou Shimin was completely confused. Which one is it? Chapter 1301. Brother June. Poplar Fruit quickly walked up, patted the haystack and said with a smile, "Brother June, this haystack is mine. You and Kong Kong should go back to the carriage room." "What do you mean?" Hu Jun glared at him and said, "Don't you live in the second room?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Isn't it the same as you? In the spirit of friendship, I discussed with my daughter and decided to give the second room to Brother Zhou. They need it more." Zhou Shimin understood that the first room was the last one left. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Poplar Fruit, you can't do that. You worked hard to get it." "Brother Zhou," Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "don't refuse. I can solve this problem. You and your 2 children should live in a better room. It's okay. The second room is yours." Hu Jun also persuaded Zhou Shimin to accept the second room. The carriage room was too narrow. If he had other choices, he would not have given the carriage room to Zhou Shimin, who had 2 children. "Shimin, don't refuse. What choice do you have? Hao is so young. Do you want him to live in the open haystack?" Under the repeated persuasion of Poplar Fruit and Hu Jun, Zhou Shimin finally accepted the most luxurious yurt. He took the children back to tidy up, and Poplar Fruit and Hu Jun continued to fight. Hu Jun was naturally unwilling to give up. He said, "Poplar Fruit, listen to me. Today this room is for me and Konger. You didn't sleep well last night. Do you want to live in such a bad room today? You take care of your daughter. Don't you feel sorry for Kiki? We'll sleep here. It's more difficult." Kong Kong also supported her father. Poplar Fruit chuckled and said, "Brother June, you're wrong. You're not a fish. How can you know the happiness of a fish?" Although the conditions were a little harsh, Kiki really liked the environment yesterday and today. She even said to me that she wanted to continue watching the stars tonight. "That won't do. You've been living in this house for 2 consecutive days. Can Kiki's body take it?" Hu Jun asked. "Kiki is in good health," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Brother June, you don't have to fight. You can stay in this house for 2 nights. You can come back next time." "Hey, what are you saying? Come back next time?" Hu Jun was also amused by Poplar Fruit. "Kong Kong, I heard that you also had a nosebleed this morning?" Poplar Fruit patted Kong Kong's shoulder gently and asked, "I think it was really hard for you to climb the mountain of flames yesterday. Also, you didn't have a good rest yesterday, right?" You also slept in the yard. Hu Jun was silent at this time. He also thought of his son's nosebleed in the morning. Although he said, a little blood is nothing to be afraid of. In his heart, even though Hu Jun often played the role of a tough guy, how could he not be worried about his son? Poplar Fruit struck while the iron was hot and said to Hu Jun, "That's why Kong Kong needs a good rest the most. Although Kiki is a girl, she has been practicing boxing with me since she was young. She rarely gets sick and her body is in good condition." Hu Jun was a little moved by Poplar Fruit. He turned to look at his son and asked, "Kong, what do you think?" Poplar Fruit saw that Kong Kong was still a little hesitant. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, Kong Kong. Kiki is fine. She can't wait to sleep on this pile of grass. She can even watch the stars at night. Of course, maybe Nui will come to play with her again at night." At this time Kong Kong nodded and said, "Okay then. Next time if you choose a bad house next time, you can exchange with us." Poplar Fruit looked at the stubborn and kind boy in front of him and said with a smile, "Okay, it's settled." Not long after Kong Kong and her father left for the carriage house, Kiki also came back. She rode a horse under the protection of the village head. She was so happy that she couldn't stop. She kept telling her father about her riding experience. In fact, the first room was not only a haystack, but also a simple tent on the ground. If it was set up, it would be like camping in the wild, and it could shelter them from the wind and rain. Poplar Fruit didn't think it could shelter them from the rain. On the prairie, when it rained, Poplar Fruit would definitely take his daughter to hide in Zhou Shimon's yurt. But Kiki didn't want her father to set up a tent. She took her father's hand and begged, "Papa, we don't need a tent, okay? We want to watch the stars at night." Not only did they want to watch the stars, but Kiki also wanted to continue the story of the constellations that her father didn't finish yesterday. "Poplar Fruit, Kiki, our house is very big. Why don't we sleep together tonight? I saw the big bed, there is a table in the middle, and there is a lot of space to sleep on both sides." After Zhou Shimon cleaned up, he came out and wanted to invite Poplar Fruit to live in the second room. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said with a smile, "You see, she doesn't even want me to set up a tent. She wants to watch the stars at night, so forget it. Kiki wants to sleep outside tonight." Kiki was also holding Xuan's hand and invited him, "Xian, let's watch the stars together tonight, okay? There are so many beautiful stars at night." "Okay, I want to watch the stars too." Xian looked at her favorite sister, and was so happy that her small eyes almost disappeared. In the end, the choice of the house was finally decided. The program team gave the dads 1 hour to pack up and rest. During this period, the dads and the kids were having a lot of fun. The main reason was that there were some leather armors and weapons in the grassland yurts, which were similar to those of ancient warriors. So the fathers gathered together and took turns to cosplay. Kiki and her friends didn't want to be outdone. Although they couldn't be Spartan warriors, they also hid in the big yurt of Zhou Shimon's house and dressed themselves up with sheets, fruit baskets and other tools. Nui and Xian were very involved. Even Kong Kong resisted the urge to let Kiki put a flower in his ear. Of course, Kiki dressed herself up more interestingly. The little girl used the sheet as a headscarf and instantly turned into a cute and charming little girl of the Kazakh people. After playing around, the fathers took the children to the gathering place that the village chief had asked them to participate in the grassland sports meet. The fathers sent 5 teams of father and son, and the Kazakh people also sent 5 teams of father and son. One of them was father and daughter. However, this time, it wasn't a game between the fathers' team and the Kazakh people's team. The village chief asked the children to touch the stones, red or blue. Those who got the same color would be in the same team. In this way, the fathers' team would be separated and mixed with the Kazakh people's team. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Village chief, what if the stones we touch are the same color?" "How is that possible?" Lin Yongjian smiled and said, "The probability is too low." "How is it impossible?" Chapter 1302. Xian was red, Kiki was red, and Kong Kong was also red. When Dejun also took out a red stone, the village chief and the other fathers were all dumbfounded. The children didn't know anything and cheered. They were happy to be with their friends, But this wasn't the village chief's original plan. The village chief glanced at the jinxed poplar fruit and smiled bitterly. Just now, poplar fruit said that our babies wouldn't get the same stone. We didn't believe it, but now it seems that the possibility is very high. The probability was very low before, but now there was only Nua and a Kazakh child left. Whether they succeeded or not, the probability became 50%. Luckily, Lu Yenhua had managed to find the blue stone. This way, the team would be split into 4 pairs of star fathers, 1 pair of Kazakh father and son, while Lu Yenhua and his son would form another team with the other 4 pairs of Kazakh father and son. After shaking hands with his new teammate, Poplar Fruit smiled and asked him some Kazakh to get closer. Kazakh and Uyghur were both Turkic languages, but there were some differences. Uyghur belonged to the southeast branch, while Kazakh belonged to the northwest branch. Compared to Uyghur, Kazakh was more similar to the Kyrgyz language that Poplar Fruit had learned, and the Tatar language that he had studied. Therefore, Poplar Fruit quickly went from a stranger to a beginner, and his relationship with his teammates became much closer. The first competition of the grassland games was wrestling. Although the format was a little different, the fathers had to tie balloons to their backs. It didn't affect the essence of wrestling. After all, they had to throw each other and make their backs hit the ground. Only then could the balloons burst. The first to go up was Zhou Shimin. He smiled and said to Poplar Fruit and the others, "I'll go first. I'll test the water for you guys." Poplar Fruit and the village chief thought that Zhou Shimin had a high chance of winning. After all, he still had explosive strength. Although his opponent was a little stronger, Zhou Shimin was a world champion. The village chief repeatedly emphasized this point. However, who knew that after Zhou Shimin went up, he wasn't used to the rhythm of wrestling. His lower body wasn't stable, and after holding on for a while, he was thrown to the ground by his opponent. See, the fathers all took a deep breath. Kiki was also shocked and shrunk to her father's side. It was too miserable. The skinny Zhou Shimin was pressed under the body of a burly man who was nearly twice his size. Zhou Shimin's figure could barely be seen, and only his miserable screams could be heard. "Are you okay?" After Zhou Shimin got up, the fathers all went up to him to express their condolences. They saw Zhou Shimin lying on the ground, still panting. "Did you hit your back?" Lu Yi asked with concern. "No, he's too heavy. I can't breathe under his weight." "Wait a minute, let me catch my breath." Zhou Shimin smiled sadly. Poplar Fruit squatted down and gently patted his chest twice. Then he stretched out his hand and smiled. "It's fine now." Just now Zhou Shimin was a little out of breath. Now that Poplar Fruit had slapped him twice, it was as if his bones had returned to their original position, and all his acupoints had been unobstructed. Zhou Shimin immediately recovered his breath. He gave Poplar Fruit a strange look, then pulled Poplar Fruit's hand and stood up with his waist and abdomen. Next, it was Lin Yongjian's turn. The weak Lin Yongjian struggled for a long time, but he was still suppressed to the ground. The competition was very exciting, but Poplar Fruit was paying attention to his daughter. The little girl was extremely nervous when she saw such a dangerous competition. She held her father's hand tightly, as if the abused father was her own father. "It's okay. It doesn't hurt. It's just a game." Poplar Fruit comforted her softly. He could feel that his daughter's palms were sweating. She was a little overly worried. Poplar Fruit knew that his daughter was still the same as the first time. She was afraid that he would get hurt. "Daddy is very powerful." Poplar Fruit gently laughed in his daughter's ear. "You must believe that Daddy will win." The little girl obediently nodded her head. She had been overly worried before. Under the guidance of her father's words, Kiki's trust in her father's skills began to gain the upper hand. Although the opponent was very strong, her father was even stronger. He would definitely be able to defeat them. Then he would not get hurt. In the third match, Poplar Fruit's side sent out the strong Kazakh brothers to face Lu Yi. They planned to stop the situation from collapsing. Otherwise, if they continued to lose, they would not be able to play anymore. Of course, Lu Yi could not win against the strong Kazakh brothers who often wrestled in the grasslands. Although the other party went easy on him, preventing him from losing immediately, Lu Yi persisted for a long time until he was panting and lying on the ground. Self-destruct. The dads laughed heartily. However, Nuyi thought that something had happened to his father as he began to cry. His emotions stemmed from his conversation with the village chief in the morning. He did not want his father to get hurt. He did not want his father to lie motionless on the ground. When Lu Yi went back to hug his son to comfort him, Nuyi voiced out his worries. Wu Wu, I don't want you to die. A child's words carry no harm. Pui pui pui. Of course, the audience was the same as Lu Yi. They were all very touched. Let's not talk about Nuyi for now. The child's emotions would be adjusted in a while. In the arena, it was already the fourth round of the competition. This time it was Poplar Fruit's turn to go on stage. Winning or losing did not matter, but Poplar Fruit was still quite interested in this wrestling competition. Wrestling was different from martial arts. There were many body techniques involved. Ignoring the hands, even the feet had things like leg entanglements, hooks, kicks, etc. For a beginner like Poplar Fruit, this was a very interesting experience. Hence, Poplar Fruit compressed his strength to be about the same as his opponent's. He also gave up on the nimbleness of his Taiji fist, and made himself like a clumsy rhinoceros as he wrestled with his opponent. Poplar Fruit's opponent was actually the one with the best wrestling skills, and the most experience among the 5 Kazakh men. All the spectating Kazakhs thought that he would be able to easily take down Poplar Fruit. Who knew that they would end up in a deadlock? They were all puzzled and thought that he had gone easy on him. However, only Poplar Fruit's opponent knew how difficult it was to deal with Poplar Fruit. He was secretly alarmed. It was not only because of Poplar Fruit's strength, but also because of Poplar Fruit's nimbleness. Although he repeatedly used his wrestling skills to test Poplar Fruit was hit by him several times at the beginning. However, after that, Poplar Fruit gradually avoided his kicks. Poplar Fruit was very happy. He was like a sponge, feeling and learning his opponent's wrestling skills. He did not use his full strength at all. He was the one who had gone easy on Poplar Fruit. However, Poplar Fruit was destined to pay a price for going easy on Poplar Fruit. In the end, Poplar Fruit was not experienced enough. His opponent was like an old fox. When he saw that he could not take down Poplar Fruit with his wrestling skills, he had an idea and set up a trap. Poplar Fruit saw that his opponent's feet were in a mess, so he took advantage of this flaw to trip his opponent. However, at that moment his opponent's footsteps suddenly became steady. Taking advantage of Poplar Fruit's unstable footing, he stepped forward, pressed on Poplar Fruit's shoulder, and twisted it. Damn it! I fell into his trap! Poplar Fruit exclaimed in his heart. He lost his balance and leaned back. It seemed that his shoulder was about to be pressed to the ground. Chapter 1303. As expected of an experienced grassland wrestler, Poplar Fruit's small mistake was caught by him. With this step, Poplar Fruit lost his balance. His upper limbs suddenly emitted a short burst of strength, causing Yanghua, who had been suppressing her own strength, to lose her balance and unable to turn around. She was about to fall. Amazing! Poplar Fruit praised in his heart, but he didn't give up. Poplar Fruit's legs, which were already in the air, suddenly shook. Relying on the strength of his waist and abdomen, he directly grabbed his opponent's shoulder and did a 360-degree somersault in the air. Everyone thought Poplar Fruit had lost, but they didn't expect this. They watched in shock as Poplar Fruit's feet landed steadily after the somersault, and his opponent didn't even have time to react. Their glasses fell to the ground. Was this a variety show? Was this a martial arts movie? Not only that, after Poplar Fruit flipped himself over, he twisted his opponent's arm and hooked him with his leg at an even faster speed. Subconsciously, he wanted to avoid his opponent's attack. That was a physical habit that a wrestling master had developed from years of wrestling. However, he was still not as fast as Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's hooking technique wasn't very skillful. He had just learned it from his opponent, but it was very useful. His eyes were also very sharp. In an instant he found his opponent's footing and hooked him. His opponent fell down with his legs spread out. Such a big guy, if he fell down directly, the ground would probably shake twice. However, Poplar Fruit added more strength to his hand. When his opponent was about to fall to the ground, he stopped his body for half a second, and then let go. Pop pop. The balloon burst. Poplar Fruit had won. All of this happened in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. Yang Guo had completed the magnificent feat of turning defeat into victory. The audience in the back row was still with their mouths wide open, their faces full of confusion. You let me win, you let me win. Poplar Fruit smiled and reached out to pull him up, patting him on the shoulder. The man from the grassland was also straightforward. He cupped his hands with a smile and said, "Not at all. I accept my defeat wholeheartedly." He could feel that Poplar Fruit was still at ease. Poplar Fruit must have gone easy on him. However, he was also impressed. The Han man in front of him didn't know how to wrestle, but his learning speed was amazing. Just by spinning a few rounds with him, he could actually wrestle in a decent manner. While they were still being modest to each other, the people behind them finally reacted. He won. Kiki, your father won. Dejun shouted. Yes, my papa won. The little girl, who was held by Hujun, also danced happily with her friends. Kiki had forgotten all her worries at this moment, and her heart was filled with pride and excitement. Well done. The fathers congratulated each other and cheered for Poplar Fruit's desperate counterattack. Poplar Fruit walked back with a smile and high-fived them one by one. Then he squatted down in front of his daughter and pointed to the side of his face. The little girl immediately understood and went forward to hug her father's neck. She kissed her father's face sweetly and said with admiration, "Papa is the best." Poplar Fruit rubbed the little girl's head and smiled with satisfaction. Next, it was Hujun's turn. After 2 big victories, the children's confidence began to rise. Xian and Dejun stood together, while Kiki leaned on her father and stood next to them, cheering for Hujun. However, at this time, Kong walked alone to the crowd where the director's sister was and hid. She secretly peeked out from behind a pillar and looked very worried. The director's sister asked softly, Kong, what's wrong? Why don't you go and cheer for your father?" Kong pouted angrily and said in a muffled voice, "He won't let me help." It turned out that Kong had tried to ask her father to help her father defeat his opponent, but Hujun refused. He didn't want his son to always win by cheating like in the morning. This wasn't a good habit. However, in the field, Hujun and his opponent were in a stalemate. They wrestled together and turned several times, but no one could move the other. Kong nervously came out from behind the pillar, wanting to see more clearly. Although he was angry with his father, the little boy still wanted his father to win. In terms of size, Hujun was stronger than his opponent, but in terms of wrestling skills, Hujun was still inferior, so he was dragged into a stalemate by his opponent. Zhou Shimin found out and shouted, "Brother Jun, he's wasting your strength. Go up and trip him." Poplar Fruit, who was always calm, was also affected by the enthusiastic atmosphere around him. He waved his fist and shouted. It was as if he was the coach on the sidelines. "Come on, Daddy Kong, come on." Dejun shouted. "Daddy Kong, come on." Chi followed suit. She cupped her hands around her mouth like a trumpet and cried out while her eyes turned into crescent moons from smiling. After a stalemate for a while, Hujun finally seized an opportunity when his opponent came forward to attack. He suddenly used his strength and pressed his opponent to the ground with brute force. He won. Hujun actually won. 3-2, Team Red won. The 3 fathers clenched their fists and cheered. This was something they didn't expect. They actually won 3 rounds in a row and turned defeat into victory. They pulled Hujun, who just got up from the ground, and pulled the Kazakh brothers, who won the crucial 3rd round. The 5 of them laughed and walked around in a circle. At this time, Kong came out from his hiding place. The little boy's laughter was hidden, but the camera captured it. He ran to his father's side with joy and hugged his father's thigh without saying a word. "You brat." Hujun rubbed his hair and smiled with slight blame. "Why didn't you cheer for your father just now? Where did you go?" Squat down, Kong said in a light voice. He was no longer as worried and nervous as before. When his father squatted down, he popped the balloons behind his father one by one. "He's really your son." Zhou Shimin and Poplar Fruit laughed. "Let's have a competition too." Xian and Dejun didn't walk into the cheering crowd. They were still immersed in the exciting atmosphere of the wrestling competition. The 2 children walked to the open space and decided to have some fun too. Xian wasn't used to wrestling for the first time. He was pushed down by Dejun, who was a head taller than him. Haha, I won. Dejun cheered happily. One more time, one more time. Xian jumped up from the ground and shouted energetically. The second time, Xian put in a lot of effort. He tangled with Dejun for a while. Dejun was the older brother and was taller than Xian. However, he inherited his father's talent and was quickly pushed to the ground by Xian. One-on-one. Neither of them was convinced. So they went for it again. But this time Xian's strength gained the upper hand. Dejun pulled him down. Did you see how good I am? Xian laughed in a childish voice. What's so good about that? This isn't good. Dejun wasn't convinced. Then you have to be brave and challenge me. Xian was like a champion. He fought with Dejun and threw him down a few times. I won. Xian said happily. You lost. Dejun said stubbornly. I really won. You really lost. All right, I won't fight with him anymore. Xian heard his father's call and ran back. Chapter 1304. Since there were matches between adults, there were also matches between children. The village chief began to announce the rules of the children's wrestling competition. Unlike the father's one-on-one matches, the children's competition was 2-on-2. Of course, Poplar Fruit could not tell the difference. It was just like two pairs of one-on-one matches starting at the same time. In the first round of 2-on-2 matches, Poplar Fruit's Team Red won. Their Kazakh kid was tall and easily won against his opponent. Of course, the two kids' wrestling skills were also up to standard, making the fathers click their tongues in wonder. And the most interesting ones were Nuoi and Kong. Nuoi came up and gave Kong a kiss, making the fathers laugh. Unfortunately, a competition was a competition. Kong threw Nuoi to the ground without mercy. This poked a hornet's nest, and Nuoi cried sadly. Poplar Fruit patted Kiki and let her comfort her little friend. He also patted Nuoi's head and smiled. It's okay. You've already performed very well. However, Poplar Fruit did not think that Nuoi crying was something praiseworthy. Although he was still young, he was still a boy. He should have the courage to fall and the courage to endure setbacks. On this point, Yanghua admired Kong, especially when she heard that Kong had climbed the flaming mountain. He had followed Lin Yongjian back and forth without any complaints of tiredness. Although he had a nosebleed in the end, it still reflected the strangeness of a man. Without further ado, it was Dejun and Xian's turn to be paired up. From the start, these two buffoons had been hysterically cheering for their opponent, Nuoi. Now, they foolishly treated each other as their opponents and prepared to fight. Hey, don't fall. Lin Yongjian said with a bitter smile. The village chief did not know whether to laugh or cry as he walked over and explained. It's you two. Fall with them. All right, but the two clowns continued to bring laughter to the audience. They were asked to move their bodies and warm up, but in the end, they foolishly lay on the ground and did push-ups. Look at their little butts moving up and down, like two little pigs looking for food. The audience in front of the TV was about to kneel on the ground from laughter. Maintain your strength. The fathers helplessly shouted again. They really couldn't do anything to them. Could these two clowns defeat each other? Poplar Fruit felt that it was impossible. Looking at their size, the two kids opposite them were half a head taller than them, and this was not even taking into account the disparity in their wrestling skills. It was indeed impossible. At the beginning of the match, the two children of the red team were both thrown to the ground by their opponents. Indeed, Xian and Dejun were not convinced. Although they had already lost, they still stood up and continued to fight. Good. It's fine, it's fine. Dejun was thrown to the ground several times in a row. Lin Yongjian saw that his son was so dizzy that he couldn't stand up. His heart ached as he came over to carry his son back. Everyone also felt that it was time to end it. However, Zhou Shimin was still behind Xian. He clapped his hands and shouted, It's okay, it's okay. Again. Xian was thrown to the ground several times in a row. Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows. He realized that little chubby Xian, who usually liked to slack off, did not complain about being tired this time. Little chubby Xian seemed to be stubborn as he stood up, and continued to charge at his opponents. Our kid definitely has good stamina. Zhou Shimin was also excited at this moment. He smiled at the village chief and said, "Let him play for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, only Zhou Shimin could be so heartless. If he could fall 7 or 8 times in a minute, how many times would he fall in 10 minutes? The other fathers looked at Xian Xian in admiration, who had repeatedly fallen down and stood up again and again. Little chubby Xian was chubby, but at this moment, he had transformed into the Hulk who would never admit defeat. He fell, got up again, fell, got up again. How many times did he fall? Poplar Fruit couldn't remember, but he could see the determined expression on Xian Xian's face after he stood up. From his eyes, he could see the fire burning in his heart. There was no need to guess, no need to see. Everyone knew that this would be the most iconic scene of this episode. Indeed, Xian Xian's indomitable spirit moved countless people sitting in front of the TV. Especially the girls. After this scene, who knew how many people had thought little chubby Xian was a pervert, but at this moment even passers-by had turned into fans. In the audience, except for Zhou Shimin who was still shouting for Xian Xian to stand up, the other fathers were quietly watching. They didn't know if they were shocked or moved by Xian Xian's performance, including Poplar Fruit, who was also looking at Xian Xian with surging emotions. For a 3-year-old child to be able to do this, it was really not easy. But after seeing him fall so many times and fall so miserably, Poplar Fruit couldn't help but want to go on stage for him and help him defeat his opponents. At first, Kiki hid in her father's arms as she couldn't bear to watch. But later, she couldn't help but look up and see Xian Xian stand up again and again. She couldn't help but jump together with Dejun and the others, cheering loudly for Xian Xian. Xiaohan said that when he first watched the show, Xiaohan also completely fell in love with little chubby Xian through this scene. Poplar Fruit suddenly remembered that last time in Min Province, after he had sparred with Zhou Shimin had suggested that Xian Xian practice martial arts with him. At that time, Poplar Fruit didn't have any intention of taking in a disciple, and he also wanted to observe Xian Xian's character. Other things aside, Poplar Fruit wanted to give up on Xian Xian's perverted desire to get close to his daughter. But now, it seemed that he had underestimated little chubby Xian. Even Xian Xian's performance was enough to move Poplar Fruit. Choosing a disciple himself. A disciple who wanted to learn real martial arts. Other than being righteous and kind, wouldn't he also want an indomitable will like Xian Xian? If he was like Nui, crying when he lost, it would be better to be a weak and pretty boy. Why would he want to learn martial arts? Of course, Poplar Fruit's idea of taking in a disciple was just a sudden interest, and he hadn't put it into action yet. He wasn't in a hurry to take in a disciple on the spot, and he just made a mental note to observe Xian Xian before bringing it up to Zhou Shimin in the future. While Poplar Fruit was deep in thought, everyone suddenly burst into laughter. This was because they could see that Xian Xian, who had been thrown countless times, suddenly stepped back, as if he was cowering in fear. But Poplar Fruit didn't see it that way. He saw steadiness in Xian Xian's steps, sharpness in Xian Xian's eyes, and a trace of wisdom in the strategy he adopted. Sure enough, as Poplar Fruit expected, Xian Xian retreated to give himself more space to attack. A lump of meat rushed over from afar, and with lightning speed, rushed towards the Kazakh child who was tired of being thrown around. Boom! Xian Xian was thrown to the ground once again. Strategies also needed to be built on the foundation of strength. The difference in ability and experience between the two children was too great, so great that it was almost impossible to make up for it. Chapter 1305. The Kazakh boy knocked Xian Xian down again. He stood up, panting, and looked at his father helplessly. The expression in his eyes seemed to be saying, "Is this enough? Why is he not done yet?" The men of the grassland should be able to let go of things, not like Xian Xian. However, from the point of view of the fathers and the program team, Xian Xian's efforts were very encouraging. Just as the Kazakh boy turned around gloomily, a fat shadow suddenly appeared behind him. It was Xian Xian. He quickly got up, then jumped like a tiger, and fell to the ground with his opponent. Yeah. The fathers cheered. Even if they had lost 100 times, winning once was enough to cheer them up. What's more, Winning once wasn't the end, but a new beginning. Of course, Xian had used a sneak attack to gain an unfair advantage. However, thinking about it, Xian's strength was not as good as his opponent's, and he had fought for so long. He had exhausted his opponent's strength, and then took him down in one fell swoop when his opponent was unprepared. Poplar Fruit smiled happily. He liked the fat boy more and more. He had courage, wisdom, and perseverance. He was indeed a good candidate for a disciple. He did not immediately ask for a disciple. He might tell Zhou Shimin later in private, because he did not want to be too flamboyant and bring trouble to himself. At this moment, Yang Guo was only 27 years old. He was young, but his skills were definitely not ordinary. Even in the present or ancient times, he would be considered a grandmaster. If he wanted to take in a disciple who had the qualifications to raise questions, the village chief praised Xian again. Then he was ready to announce the next round of the competition. "Hey, village chief, she hasn't competed yet." Poplar Fruit smiled and pointed at his daughter. Yes, the 4 boys had already competed. He couldn't leave out Kiki, right? The village chief looked at Poplar Fruit strangely. He secretly complained in his heart. What a father! He is willing to let his daughter wrestle with others. He asked doubtfully. Girls don't have to compete, right? This wrestling is not very suitable for girls. Let her have a try. Don't look down on girls. Poplar Fruit smiled and explained. The main thing is that I want Kiki to experience it. No matter if it is sour, sweet, bitter, or spicy, she has to experience it herself to know how it feels. Watching the other children play, Kiki would never know how it felt to wrestle and be wrestled. Even if she was wrestled, it would not necessarily be painful. Do you want to go up and play? Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and asked with a smile. Kiki had not recovered from the excitement of cheering for her brother. She held her father's hand and nodded with a smile. She said in a clear voice, "Of course." Since Chi-Chi had said so, the village chief couldn't refuse. The reason why he didn't want girls to compete before was because he was worried that Chi-Chi was delicate and would cry if she fell. Let alone Chi-Chi being a girl, it didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. The children in the city were all spoiled since childhood. How could they endure hardships? Didn't Nui cry just now? I hope Kiki can be stronger. The village chief looked forward to it. Poplar Fruit also thought the same, but he hoped that his daughter could be as strong as Xian. However, the changes in the plot were hard to predict. He asked Chi-Chi to wrestle with the little Kazakh girl on the other side, but the result was that the 2 girls hugged each other gently and swayed back and forth. It was no different from the friendly hug they had received at the request of the village head referee just now. Ha 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 ha. The 2 girls were about the same height. They were shy when they saw strangers. They hugged each other and looked at each other. Then they could not help but laugh. Hey, you 2 are wrestling. The fathers did not know whether to laugh or cry. Poplar Fruit also smiled and shook his head. Although Xian, Dajuan and the other children were shouting, "Kiki, sister, you can do it." The 2 girls were not willing to use force. They were not willing to push each other down. We are good friends. Kiki turned her head and said to her father with a smile. Okay, I know you are good friends. Poplar Fruit spread his hands helplessly. It seemed that they could not compete in wrestling. How was it wrestling between the 2 children? They were obviously playing house to make friends. Now I announce that the winners of this round are Kiki and Yanakana. The village chief raised the 2 girls' hands. Chi-Chi ran back to her father's side and giggled as she pulled her father's hand and said, Papa, I made another friend. Her name is Yanakana. Very good, very good. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. You can share the victory with your friend. Papa thinks you are very good. Although the result was not satisfactory, and it was not as Poplar Fruit had expected that Kiki would learn to face setbacks and fall, Poplar Fruit was still very pleased. At least, his daughter was very kind. She treated people with kindness, and could also gain the love of others. Next, there was a candy-eating competition for the children. However, it was not easy to eat the candy because it was buried in the pile of milk powder. Then they could not use their hands to pick it up. They could only use their faces to find it. After a few rounds, the children all became white and puffy cats. Kiki was the same. Her originally delicate and pretty little face was now like a Beijing opera makeup. It was impossible to recognize her. When Poplar Fruit cleaned the milk powder on her nose and mouth, the little girl was very naughty and wiped a handful of milk powder on her father's face. Ha 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 ha. Because the little girl's nose was not very good, her laughter was a little muffled. On her white face, only a pair of clear eyes could be seen clearly. Papa hasn't laughed at you yet. Poplar Fruit smiled and pinched the little girl's nose. He said intimately, "You are like a little cat." In this round of the competition, the most outstanding performance was not Dejun, but he was the one who had made the most progress. We have to give special praise to Lin Dejun. Everyone knows that Dejun usually likes to be clean. But today Dejun, even if he gets a little dirty, it doesn't matter. But we are doing this for the competition, right? Dejun had made progress, but he did not work as hard as the village chief said. The village chief was a little exaggerated, but he was very good at grasping the child's thoughts. In front of everyone, he smiled and praised Dejun. Lin Yongjian was not the only one who smiled in relief. Dejun also nodded happily. Since he had made progress this time, Dejun would definitely be able to do better next time. When it came to a child's education, they could not keep suppressing him. If they suppressed him until he lost confidence and developed a rebellious mentality, it would definitely backfire. It was better to encourage him and let him feel a sense of honor and pride for doing the right thing. This way, he would be able to take the initiative to do better next time. Chapter 1306. After a tiring day of gaming, everyone gathered at Zhou Shimon's yurt for dinner. Other than the dishes, there was also a sumptuous barbecue. The grill was set up by Lin Yongjian and the other fathers, while the barbecue was done by Poplar Fruit. The fragrant barbecue lamb skewers, beef, and chicken drumsticks were grilled until the oil dripped and burst, filling the air with a fragrant aroma. When the barbecue was done, a few of the children were brought to take a bath. Otherwise, looking at the way the fathers swallowed their saliva, the children's saliva would have drowned the grassland. This also gave Poplar Fruit, who had been disgusted by noodles for the past 3 trips, a chance to show off his skills. For some reason, Poplar Fruit was satisfied when he saw the 6 children eating so happily. Of course, not all of them were eating. There were some twists and turns in the process. Due to Lu Ye's concern for Kong Kong, he said a few more words to Kong Kong not to eat too much barbecue. None of his words were harsh, but in the end Kong Kong cried. This made Lu Yi panic, and the other fathers quickly comforted Kong Kong. No one expected the usually cold and strong Kong Kong to cry so easily. "I'm not blaming you. Your uncle Lu Yi is doing this for your own good." Hu Jun did not think that this was a big problem. He smiled and patted Kong Kong's shoulder. I know. Brother Kong Kong is crying, because my papa's cooking is super delicious." Kiki was always her father's #1 fan. She chewed on a chicken drumstick and giggled. She did not finish her sentence. The little girl meant that Kong Kong cried because he could not bear to part with the delicious food. Of course, this reasoning was wrong, but it still made the fathers laugh. The tense atmosphere from before eased quite a bit. It's fine. Kong Kong was a man. He only felt wronged for a short while. Soon he thought it through and sat at the side with pursed lips. Poplar Fruit tore apart a barbecued chicken drumstick with chopsticks and ate the crispy part. He tore off the fragrant but not hot chicken inside, and wrapped it in a green leaf before passing it to Kong Kong. "Try this. Vegetable buns with meat. Is it delicious?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Usually the children would play together noisily, but this time, they couldn't stop eating. Every one of them was eating in silence and no one spoke. Xian was even more ferocious. His face was covered in oil from the chicken drumstick. He hadn't even finished eating the drumstick when he saw his father picking up mutton for Hao Hao. He couldn't wait to open his mouth and cry for food. His mouth was full. "Eat slowly, don't rush." Poplar Fruit smiled and patted Xian's back to help him calm down. "No, I'm telling you, Poplar Fruit, your barbecue skills are definitely this." Lin Yongjian gave a thumbs up and laughed. The other fathers also agreed. Hee. Poplar Fruit didn't feel embarrassed and smiled generously. "It's good that you like it. If you all come to Yangcheng, I'll definitely bring your children to our house to play. I don't dare to say anything else, but I'll definitely treat you well. Poplar Fruit was a hospitable person. Especially now that his career had stabilized, teachers, students, old friends, and even colleagues from the foreign trade company often came to his house. But Kiki was even more hospitable. When the little girl heard her father's words, she happily pulled Nui, who was beside her, and said, "Brother Nui, come to my house to play, okay? My papa can make a lot of delicious food." The little girl didn't show favoritism. After getting Nui's nod, she happily ran over to Brother Kong Kong and Brother Dajuan. "I want to go too, I want to go too." Xian didn't care about eating the drumstick. He had long admired the little sister's house. He heard that there were a lot of fun things to do, a lot of delicious food, and most importantly, there were beautiful little sisters. "That's right, come to my house to play together." Chi-Chi wrapped her arms around them and said happily. To be able to get the nod of so many good friends, Kiki was very happy. After tidying up the table, the village chief began to chat with the children. This was the last segment of the night. However, the fathers couldn't stay in the tent. They all went outside to wait. When they came back, the village chief explained that the reason he sent the fathers away was to let the 5 children vote for the most popular father. Each child had 2 votes and they could even choose their own father. Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian looked at each other and smiled. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad. Even if there weren't any other places, maybe their children would have at least 1 vote. Why didn't Poplar Fruit have that much confidence? Actually, it didn't mean that the children would vote for him just because he was handsome. Because Lu Yi was so active, he had a higher chance of getting the votes of the majority of the children. Although Poplar Fruit was the most affectionate father, he wasn't active. Among the 5 fathers, he didn't leave as deep an impression on the children as the serious Lin Yongjian. Hu Jun was also very capable. Although he usually had a straight face, he could stand up at critical moments to mediate the atmosphere. He also protected the children whose fathers went on missions. He was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. He was meticulous and had a good reputation among the children. The village chief was also bad. He asked him to start from the back, but he chose to start from the second place in the middle. In second place, there were 2 small-eyed brothers, Lin Yongjian and Zhou Shimin. This made the 2 of them feel flattered. They were actually in second place? Zhou Shimin's votes, other than his own son, Dajuan, also voted for him. The reason was very interesting. It was because Zhou Shimin had taught him how to fight. It looked like the fight between Xian and Dajuan in the afternoon was quite effective. What was interesting was that other than his son's vote, Lin Yongjian also received Kiki's vote. The reason why Kiki voted for Lin Yongjian was very simple. Yesterday, Lin Yongjian had invited her to his house for a meal. Then, she felt that Uncle Lin Yongjian was a very nice person, and was very amiable. It looked like Lin Yongjian was a loving father. However, when it came to his children, Lin Yongjian was a little anxious. From Kiki's point of view, Lin Yongjian was also a good father. It could be seen that children's preferences were constantly changing. Unless it was a deep affection, their impression of a person could easily change. But what surprised Lu Yi was not that he also got second place, but that the person who voted for him was Kong Kong. Just now, Kong Kong was so aggrieved by his words that she cried. Although the little boy cried, he still understood later on. Lu Yi was doing it for his own good. He was earnestly advising him. If he didn't love him, why would he be so long-winded? Kong Kong's vote had touched Lu Yi to the core. He even said a lot of apologetic words to her. The Fire Glory Society's president was usually like a child. He was very sincere and straightforward. He spoke without thinking, but he was indeed concerned about every child. It was just that he did not pay attention to his own words. To educate the other children like how he educated his own children was somewhat inappropriate. Chapter 1307. If it was not Lu Yi, then the remaining 3 places were already revealed. Of course, Poplar Fruit and Hu Jun were still smiling as they humbly declined each other. The village chief could not bear to watch any longer and announced the results. First place was indeed Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit gave a speech and smiled. It's really not that I'm better than the forefathers. It's all thanks to this meal. Thank you. Thank you for the children's good graces. Hu Jun's vote was stolen by Kong Kong. Needless to say, Poplar Fruit sighed. Other than his daughter's vote, there were 2 votes from Xian and Nuai. Their reasons were included in the program. Xian was the first to express his opinion. Because Uncle Poplar Fruit's drumsticks are delicious. It was indeed in line with his gluttonous nature. This was the same as Kiki. They were both bought over by a meal. Of course, Kiki was bought over by a meal from Lin Yongjian's family. Nui gave a different reason. Because Uncle Poplar Fruit is Kiki's father. She is my good friend. Nui finally stopped floating. Just now, the village chief had asked him which father he liked other than his own. In the end, Nui said that he likes small animals. Me too. He is Big Sister's father. That's why I like him. Because I like Big Sister. Xian appeared again. Not only did he agree, he also added a final sentence. Poplar Fruit had become the most popular father among the children. Although he said that he did not mind, he was still quite happy in his heart. This was still a benefit. Did he not hear the village chief say, "Tomorrow morning at 6:30, the fathers will be milking the cows, but the most popular father does not have to go." That good. Lu Yi and the other fathers looked at Poplar Fruit with envy. Poplar Fruit chuckled. He clapped and even high-fived his daughter. However, Poplar Fruit suddenly thought of something and said, "That good? Village chief, are you trying to trick me?" Poplar Fruit felt that although it was a good thing to have a holiday, the village head was not a kind person. His foxtail had not been revealed yet. "I also feel that there's more to it," Lu Yi said. Soon Poplar Fruit could no longer smile. What is this dad doing at home? Although the village chief was smiling, Poplar Fruit always felt that he was smiling wickedly. I have to be responsible for all the babies waking up, dressing, eating, and going to the toilet. Then let them cry and make them happy. Heavens! Poplar Fruit felt that he had been cheated. He wanted to cry but had no tears. This time, he was really dumbfounded. It was not that he was afraid of 6 children. In fact, he was a little afraid. But compared to taking care of children, especially children who might be grumpy when they just woke up, Poplar Fruit was more willing to milk cows. "Oh right, can I change? Who would want to take care of a child?" Before Poplar Fruit said anything, he knew that it was impossible. Let us give a round of applause and congratulate Poplar Fruit. The village chief was very good at stirring up the atmosphere. He had just suppressed the forefathers to the point that they were filled with envy and jealousy towards Poplar Fruit. Now he had stirred up everyone's enthusiasm to celebrate Poplar Fruit's misfortune. All right, looking at the father's expressions of exultation and celebration, Poplar Fruit knew that no one would change with him. "Why are you clapping?" Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he rubbed the little girl who was clapping. This child had pulled the other 4 children up to clap as well. "Because I like Daddy to take care of me," Kiki said happily. It turned out that she understood the village chief's words. However, Kiki wanted her father to stay by her side more than not being able to see her father when she woke up in the morning. "Poplar Fruit, you can do it. You're so good at taking care of children. 8 or 10 of them won't be a problem." The fathers laughed as they patted Poplar Fruit's shoulders. They were relieved that they didn't have to wake up in the morning to take care of the little ancestors. Poplar Fruit helplessly shook his head. He also accepted it. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't someone who was easily frustrated. While the fathers were around, he quickly asked them how they usually took care of their children. Hu Jun said the most rudely, "It's nothing. Pull him up from the bed. He can put on his own clothes. Kong Kong, tomorrow you'll be the big brother. You have to help Uncle Yang take care of the other brothers and sisters. Do you understand?" All right, Hu Jun's words were equivalent to not saying anything. The other fathers more or less said something, but they were obviously fathers who didn't know how to take care of children. The summary was also a mess. At night, everyone returned to their homes. Lu Yi and Zhou Shimin, the 2 big families, gathered around Poplar Fruit's pile of grass. While helping him set up the tent, they worriedly asked, "Will it work? The wind is so strong at night." The main thing was that they were worried about Kiki. The little girl looked delicate. Only Poplar Fruit, as a father, didn't feel sorry for her. She stayed in a poorhouse for 2 days and refused to stay in someone else's house. It's okay. Actually, this tent is very comfortable. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, It's not worse than your yurts. Looking at the side, Xian Xian and Hao Hao couldn't help but fall asleep in the yurt. After all, they were too young. Kiki and Nuyi were still playing on the grass next to them. Nuyi hugged Kiki's neck again, but the little girl was ticklish and giggled and avoided him. Brother Zhou, you don't have to tie her up first, Poplar Fruit smiled and said. She still has to look at the stars for a while before sleeping, so I'll wait for her to fall asleep at night and then get up to pull up the tent. With the help of the fathers, there were only 2 steps left to the tent, so Poplar Fruit gratefully sent the 2 kind fathers away. At night, after listening to the story of the stars for a while, Kiki gradually fell asleep. She was still too tired from playing. But the next day, Poplar Fruit still got up very early. Even the fathers hadn't gotten up yet to milk the cows. Poplar Fruit moved around room 1. Although he got up early, the sky of the grassland was already as bright as a mirror. Coincidentally, Poplar Fruit also met a Kazakh herdsman riding a horse and herding sheep. What was more coincidental was that the other party happened to be the opponent that Poplar Fruit had wrestled yesterday. Although Poplar Fruit couldn't speak Kazakh and the other party couldn't speak Mandarin, the 2 had a common hobby. And that was wrestling. Of course, for Poplar Fruit, wrestling was also a kind of kung fu. Under the other party's proposal, Poplar Fruit was happy to compare notes with the master again. Poplar Fruit still suppressed his strength, but this time, the Kazakh master wrestler couldn't do anything to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's wrestling skills had improved rapidly. In addition, he was agile and strong, so he knocked down the other party in a few moves. The grassland man was very forthright. If he lost, he lost. Not only was he not jealous, but he was also very happy to invite Poplar Fruit to ride his horse to play. He saw the envy in Poplar Fruit's eyes when he saw him riding a horse. After playing for a while, Poplar Fruit also learned how to ride a horse. However, this good time didn't last long. When he saw the fathers get up and walk to the cow pen, Poplar Fruit knew that his test was coming. Chapter 1308. Morning. Poplar Fruit rode his horse and greeted the fathers with a smile. His riding skills were not good, so when he was about 10 meters away, he reined in the horse and jumped off. He returned the horse to the Kazakh man and slowly came back. Slowly, it was not that Poplar Fruit was pretending. It was just that after riding a horse, his walking was not very natural, so Poplar Fruit walked slowly. Depressed, even with his physical fitness, it was difficult to ride a horse. Poplar Fruit secretly complained in his heart. Of course, he also knew that it would be difficult for the first time, but it would be better in the future. Poplar Fruit, why are you so early? The fathers gathered in front of Zhou Shimin's house because Zhou Shimin had already brought his 2 sons out to watch the sunrise. I'm used to waking up early. Coincidentally, I met the fellow from yesterday and learned how to ride a horse. Poplar Fruit laughed, came up, and touched the face of the still confused little Hao Hao and said, Hao Hao, good morning. You're so obedient. You didn't even cry. Wah. Poplar Fruit's touch was like touching a tiger's butt, provoking the emotionally unstable Hao Hao. He awkwardly retracted his hand. Zhou Shimin quickly coaxed him. Why are you crying? That's your uncle Poplar Fruit. Isn't Daddy still holding you? Zhou Shimin helplessly smiled at Poplar Fruit and said, Today I think it's more difficult to toss around. Daddy, I also want to be held. In the yurt, a naked little chubby Xian came out and said in a childish voice. Fortunately, the director's sister did not follow, otherwise she would have covered her eyes. Let me do it. Poplar Fruit smiled. Poplar Fruit changed Xian Xian's clothes and asked, Hey, why don't I see Brother Yi? When I looked just now, he was still sleeping. Lin Yongjian complained. It was Hu Jun who went in to wake him up. He's still washing up, but he should be here soon. I say, if you could all wake up the children like Brother Zhou, it would save me a lot of trouble, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Then I wouldn't have to go door to wake them up. Zhou Shimin was really good. He helped to wake up the 2 youngest ones. Otherwise, Poplar Fruit would have to be coaxed for a long time. That won't do. Hu Jun laughed and said, "Wouldn't that be too good for you? No, you have to complete this mission by yourself." When Lu Yi came up, the four fathers left their children with poplar fruit and went to milk the cows. Poplar fruit carried Hao Hao in his arms. Hao Hao was not easy to take care of. Luckily, he had his brother Xian Xian with him. Little Fatty Xian and Little Fatty Xian each held a bottle of star milk and drank it. With such delicious milk, the two little foodies did not care about crying. Next, Poplar Fruit took the two little ones to wake up his daughter. Although Kiki was young, she was quite good at taking care of her younger siblings. With Kiki around, Poplar Fruit could lighten a lot of the burden. Letting Xian Xian hold Hao Hao's hand and stand to the side, Poplar Fruit untied the tent that was set up last night to make it easier for the photographer to take photos. In the haystack, the little girl was sleeping sweetly like a sleeping beauty. She slept in a warm sleeping bag. Her shiny black hair was like a splash of water, spreading out on the pillow and quilt. "Sister Kiki, wake up." Xian Xian, who was holding her brother, climbed up with difficulty and shouted, the sun is shining on our buttocks." Poplar Fruit smiled and picked up the little girl who was still rubbing her eyes in a daze from the haystack. He helped her change into a coat. Although it was already summer, the morning air in Shijiang was still a bit cold. "Look, the sun is rising." Poplar Fruit wiped his daughter's face with a wet towel and sat her down on the haystack for a while to let her calm down. "Xian Xian, do you think it's beautiful?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. He could not neglect the two little ones who were also sitting next to him. "Beautiful." Xian Xian looked at Kiki and nodded without blinking. "I'm asking you whether the sun is beautiful or not." Poplar Fruit helplessly rubbed little Fatty Xian's hair and said, "I'm not asking you, Kiki." Hee. The little girl giggled in her father's arms. "Okay, we're going to wake up the other three brothers." After tidying up, Poplar Fruit took the three children down from the haystack and let Kiki and Xian Xian hold Hao Hao's hand and said, I'll also hold my sister's hand." Xian Xian looked at Kiki, who was separated by a brother. He could not help but shake off his brother's hand and went to Kiki's side. "Wah!" Hao Hao pointed his little finger at his brother, who ran away and opened his mouth to cry. Originally, Hao Hao was still in a daze when he woke up in the morning. His father was not by his side, so his brother was the last thing he could rely on. Now his brother ran away and did not want him. Hao Hao suddenly felt that he had no one to rely on and cried sadly. Kiki tried to comfort little Hao Hao, but to no avail. Don't cry, Hao Hao, don't cry, Uncle will hold you." Poplar Fruit tried to hold Hao Hao by himself, but found that the effect was not obvious. Hao Hao still cried when he wanted to. Poplar Fruit scratched his head. In the past, Kiki was not so difficult to coax. The little girl was very obedient to her father. Poplar Fruit had an idea. He squatted down and still held Hao Hao on his lap. He directed the two little ones and said, "Kiki, Xian Xian, you two make faces." At first, Xian Xian didn't know how to make funny faces, but after Chi-Chi pinched his nose and pouted a few times, he followed her example. It was even more fun to make funny faces with his chubby little face. This was too novel for Hao Hao. He gradually stopped crying. Originally, he was all bark and no bite. He looked at his two brothers and sisters who were playing more and more crazily in front of him in surprise. Okay. Poplar Fruit saw that Hao Hao had calmed down. He smiled and pulled the two little guys who were about to do somersaults and make faces. Hao Hao was still held by himself. Poplar Fruit directed the two little guys to walk to the next Nuoyi's house. It had to be said that because of Hao Hao, they arrived at Nuoyi's house a little late. The sun had already risen. Poplar Fruit frowned and looked at the sky. He said to Kiki and Xian Xian, "Kiki, Xian Xian, you two go find Brother Dejun and wake him up." However, Poplar Fruit looked at Hao Hao in his arms and his head hurt again. No, he could not let them go. Otherwise, Hao Hao would cry again if he did not see his brother. Wait, let Kiki go alone? How could that be? Just now, Poplar Fruit was at Zhou City Min's house. He saw Xian Xian walk out alone naked. Poplar Fruit asked his daughter to wake up the other boys. Who could guarantee that Dejun or Kong Kong would not walk out naked? Ahem, you two should wait for me here. We'll go together later. Poplar Fruit looked helplessly at Xian Xian and Kiki, who were looking at him innocently. Chapter 1309. Let Xian Xian and Kiki stand outside first. Poplar Fruit pushed open the door of the yurt with Hao Hao in his arms and walked in. Fortunately, Nuai was not sleeping naked. On the contrary, Nuai was awake. However, the little boy was lying on the bed with his legs crossed, and his mouth was chattering. She didn't know if he was talking about the journey to the west. Nuai, you're awake? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Kiki, Xian Xian, you two come in. Nuai has already woken up. Seeing the arrival of his friends, Nuai happily got up. The clothes he wore were a bit like the linen short coat worn by the poor scholars in ancient times. It was blue, a little loose, but comfortable. Nuai did not need to change his clothes, so Poplar Fruit handed him shoes to change into. The few children walked out of the yurt hand in hand. The older children were more sensible. Nuai was easier to deal with. He did not need to change his clothes, and he could wear his shoes. He hoped that Dejun and Kong Kong would be easy to take care of. Poplar Fruit carried Hao Hao and brought the three children who had been playing all the way to the next house. Dejun lived in a tent, but the environment was much more comfortable than Poplar Fruit's house. However, before Dejun could be pulled up, Kong Kong, who lived in the carriage next door, had already heard the sound and jumped down neatly dressed. Brother Kong Kong, you're up? Kiki greeted him happily. Brother Kong Kong. Nuai was as enthusiastic as ever, and went up to give Kong Kong a big hug. Yanghua had to help Dejun, who had just woken up, change his clothes and put on his shoes, so she let the children play outside. My clothes are here. Dejun pointed and said. After he woke up, he did not cry or make a fuss. He obediently let Uncle Poplar Fruit wipe his face. After changing out of his pajamas, Poplar Fruit helped Dejun put on his clothes and heard the children talking loudly outside. Brother Kong Kong, I heard from Papa that your family lives in a carriage. It's so cool. Kiki was quite curious. As long as it was something new, she would want to see it. She said, Brother Kong Kong, can you take me to see it? Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows. I want to go too, I want to go too. Behind them, Xian Xian and Nuai began to clamor. Hearing the sound gradually getting softer, Yanghua knew that Kong Kong had brought them there. Poplar Fruit didn't want his daughter to be alone in a room with other boys. However, it wouldn't be a problem if many of her friends went to play together. Of course, Poplar Fruit still sped up and changed Dejun's clothes. Then he went to look for the group of little guys who had run off to God knows where. Papa. Poplar Fruit looked over and saw Kiki poking her head out of the back window of the carriage. She smiled and waved at her father. In the morning, Poplar Fruit didn't have time to braid Kiki's hair. He just casually tied it into a long ponytail. However, the little girl was born beautiful. Even if her hairstyle was simple, she was still delicate and pretty. When she waved her hand, it was as if a gentle spring breeze was blowing on one's face. Of course, this was relative to the audience behind the camera. Let's go. I'll take you to find your father. Poplar Fruit smiled and waved at his daughter. The little girl jumped down like a little deer and happily jumped to her father's side. She pulled her father's clothes and said, Papa, let me tell you, Brother Kong Kong's house is very fun. Really? Poplar Fruit held Hao Hao and smiled at his daughter. Yes, yes. I also think it's very fun. Brother Kong Kong's house is in the carriage. People can also sleep in the carriage. Nuai also followed and chirped. Looking at the group of little ones in front of him, Poplar Fruit was greatly relieved. Although 6 children were a bit too many and the challenge was quite big, Poplar Fruit finally completed this task. However, it seemed to be quite smooth. Poplar Fruit thought with some pride. Of course, Poplar Fruit still knew that the credit wasn't all on him. Waving his hand, Poplar Fruit smiled and took the children to find a small open space. There were quite a lot of open spaces on the grassland. In front of Nuoyi's house, there was a large open space. The best thing was that the grass was neat, so it was not easy to trip. Poplar Fruit put Hao Hao down. He clapped his hands and said to the 6 children with a smile, Who can tell Uncle? What do you usually do when you get up in the morning? Drink Mimi. The foodie little Chuangshuan said without hesitation. You just drank this. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He didn't need to worry about breakfast. Later, the fathers would bring fresh milk back. I know. Nui raised his hand. The way he raised his hand was very similar to the way he raised his hand while sitting on the desk in elementary school. My father will kiss my mother, kiss my sister, and kiss me. Nui floated up again. His answer revealed a lot of things about his family. Poplar Fruit was stunned, but before he could react, Kiki spoke again. My papa also kisses me. Chi-Chi seemed to be sharing something fun with her good friend. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws in excitement. She said, my papa also kisses mama, but he only kisses her secretly. Poplar Fruit's head was full of black lines. It was too late to reach out to cover his daughter's mouth. Poplar Fruit coughed twice and said, today let's get up in the morning and practice kung fu together, okay? Okay. The little girl took the lead and clapped her hands happily. With his daughter's support, Poplar Fruit pointed to Kiki with a smile and said, Kiki, tell everyone, what is the name of the kung fu that Dad is going to teach everyone? It's called Kiki Stupid Fist. Kiki giggled. Although she smiled so brightly, in fact, the little girl's eyes revealed a little mischievous. Poplar Fruit wouldn't let her do as she wished. He stretched out a finger and shook it, saying, No. There is only Stupid Fist, no Kiki Stupid Fist. Kiki pouted her small mouth. She was a little unhappy. Kiki stepped forward. Poplar Fruit suddenly became serious and said sternly. The little girl hurriedly walked forward. She didn't know how many steps she took, but she stepped back again. Her flustered appearance was quite cute. Poochie, okay, don't be nervous. You demonstrate Stupid Fist to your older brothers and younger brothers. Poplar Fruit couldn't pretend anymore. In front of a few children who were only 4 years old on average, he couldn't be a strict teacher and laughed. However, Kiki became serious. This could be said to be because when Poplar Fruit taught her kung fu, he treated her with the ancient etiquette of a master and disciple. The little girl's beautiful face was taut, and she cupped her fist and bowed to Poplar Fruit in a standard posture. Although she was a little nervous, but at this moment, it gave people a valiant feeling. Poplar Fruit also cupped his fist and bowed. If he wanted to do etiquette, he had to do a complete set. Bang! With a clear cry like that of a nightingale, Chi-Chi began her clumsy demonstration of her fists. Chapter 13:10. The moves of Benben Fist were a mixture of the essence of many famous boxing techniques. However, in order to make it suitable for children to practice, Poplar Fruit removed the complicated movements and designed it with short, flat, and fast as the criteria. Just by looking at Kiki's practice in the field, one could see that she didn't use too much strength in her punches and kicks. There was a feeling of holding back half of the force. This was short, so as not to let the children, whose muscles and bones hadn't fully formed, hurt their bodies. On the other hand, there was less jumping and running. As long as it was kung fu, except for those that were completely grounded, almost all of them had moves to jump and run. Poplar Fruit also removed these moves. These little children had to be extra careful if they wanted to stand firm. If they jumped around, they would probably fall and have a bloody nose and a swollen face before practicing. Although after removing these moves, this boxing technique had a lot of shackles. After all, it was only designed to train the body. There was no need to make it too gorgeous. Poplar Fruit also didn't want his daughter to fall and break her face. It was better not to practice this thing. There was also the word fast. Fast was about the quick transition of the posture. Anyway, it was originally to hold back the force. When Poplar Fruit designed it, he designed the transition of each movement very simple and smooth. As long as it followed the pattern, it wouldn't be incoherent like a robot. Short, flat, and fast, it allowed Kiki to make an ordinary boxing technique for strengthening the body vigorous and vigorous. Listening to the little girl's delicate shouts, her small body was sonorous and powerful, valiant and formidable. This inadvertently completely subverted Kiki's usual image of a weak, spoiled, and cute little girl who could kill people when she acted coquettishly. Not to mention the audience, just looking at the 5 little boys standing in a row. They were so surprised that their jaws were about to drop. Good. Well done. Poplar Fruit smiled and praised his daughter. Then he looked at the 5 little boys and asked, "Do you want to learn?" Yes. The responses were uneven, but they all nodded in unison. Of course, How still didn't quite understand and didn't move. Since they wanted to learn, Poplar Fruit took advantage of the time before the fathers came back to teach them Benben Fist. They definitely wouldn't be able to learn it in a short period of time. Poplar Fruit was just taking them to exercise and pass the time. The children practiced very seriously, but their postures were all crooked, which made a lot of jokes. Take Nuai for example. When he asked him to use his left foot, he used his right foot. When he asked him to use his left fist, he used his right fist. Little chubby Xian was also the same. He only shouted with all his might, mimicking his sister Kiki's "Ao Ao." But after giving a punch, he had to see what his other friends would do. "No, it's not like that. Hee." Kiki was hopping around anxiously at the side. She smiled and corrected her friend's movements. But even though Kong Kong had the best sense of balance, she still couldn't stand steadily after the kick. "Hey!" Xian shouted with all his might. However, there was a problem with this shout. Xian's originally white and chubby little face suddenly turned red. Poplar Fruit didn't notice. Xian turned around and ran towards Nui's family. When Poplar Fruit turned around and saw it, he quickly followed, but Xian had already closed the door. Xian. Poplar Fruit knocked on the door. Xian was inside, so Poplar Fruit couldn't push hard. The other children also ran over. Kiki walked at the back. How put his hand over, and Kiki pulled him slowly. "What's wrong with him?" Poplar Fruit was puzzled and turned to ask Dejun. "I don't know." Dejun shook his head. Although he was standing beside Xian, his attention was on Poplar Fruit's uncle. Poplar Fruit had a hard time persuading Xian to open the door. Xian let him in alone. After asking, Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he found out the reason behind this. Xian peed his pants. "I peed my pants." Xian lowered his head and whispered. He was too embarrassed to look at Poplar Fruit's uncle. Well, he didn't go to the toilet in the morning and drank so much milk. He practiced so hard just now that he couldn't hold it in anymore. Fortunately, How had already peed, so there was no danger of the brothers peeing together. "Why didn't you tell Uncle earlier?" Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at Xian who was embarrassed in front of his sister. He helplessly rubbed his head. "Let's go. Uncle will take you back to your room to change your pants." "I don't want to go out." Xian was a mischievous child and was still shy. Poplar Fruit had to walk out and call Nui in. He asked him to lend Xian a pair of pants. But before that, Poplar Fruit asked the 3 children outside to hold hands and stand at the door. Kong Kong watched and couldn't run around. How was carried in. Poplar Fruit didn't believe that the 3 children outside could take good care of their little brother. "My pants. That's all I have." Nui found them and left them for Poplar Fruit to try on. Nui's pants weren't too long. Xian could barely put them on, but he couldn't zip them up. "Is it tight?" Poplar Fruit asked. "It's not tight," Xian said. "It's still not tight." Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he pulled on Xian's pants. His pants were stretched tight by Xian's chubby thighs. He couldn't move them. "You have to lose weight." Nui also followed Poplar Fruit's uncle and squatted down. He supported his face with his arms and sighed like an adult. "Aya, what should I do?" Poplar Fruit was ready to take Xian to his yurt to find his pants. Fortunately, they finally found Nui's elastic pants. Xian was finally saved. When they walked out of the door, the 3 children were still standing outside obediently. But at this time, the sun rose and the weather started to get hot. Nui was fine, but the other children were wearing a little thick clothes, especially Kiki. She had done so much exercise just now. Now her neck and face were sweaty. "It's okay. Unzip your clothes." Poplar Fruit smiled and asked the children to unzip their jackets. They couldn't take them off directly. The children's physique was not as good as the adults. In the windy grassland, it was better to wear a jacket to prevent them from catching a cold. "Daddy is back." Nuai suddenly shouted excitedly as he danced with joy. Wasn't that right? The forefathers who came back from milking the cows were holding the milk jugs. They walked through the bright sunshine and green grass, as if they were walking in spring. Of course, the fathers brought the children to observe the cow pens on the ranch, and the process of the workers milking the cows. But this trip was considered to have come to an end. Regarding this trip, when they were interviewed later, the fathers were filled with emotions. For example, Lin Yongjian said that the monotonous grassland experience had improved his relationship with Dejun. For example, Zhou Shimin had completed the task of taking care of 2 children. In the midst of the hardship, he had a new breakthrough. And poplar fruit? Kiki had given him the most surprises this time. I didn't expect her to be so willing to challenge the difficult environment with me. She never complained about the hardships and tiredness, Poplar Fruit said. Perhaps with a father by her side, she could be happy in the difficult environment. Chapter 13:11. Poplar Fruit also did not return to Yangcheng directly. He flew to Beijing with Lu Yi and the others. The little girl was the happiest. Although she was staying in a hotel, Poplar Fruit declined Lu Yi and Hu Jun's invitation to stay at home. Poplar Fruit still sent her to play with Nuai, Dejun and Kong Kong during the day. Chi-Chi was very happy to be able to play with her friends. Every night when she came back home, she couldn't help but chatter to her father about how many alleys she had visited and how many snacks she had eaten in the old capital. Poplar Fruit did not come to Beijing to let Kiki find her friends to play with. He had his own mission. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs couldn't just casually transfer Yanghua with a transfer letter. Even if it was just a translation for a short distance, it still needed to be taken seriously. Poplar Fruit came this time to pass the Ministry of Foreign Affairs language test. He also needed to receive some etiquette and translation training. Of course, for Poplar Fruit who had already proven his ability, this was just a process. But Higashiyama University took it seriously. This was a convenient way for Poplar Fruit to obtain the language certificate without having to go through the formal and complicated test. So even if it took a few days, Poplar Fruit had to be patient and go through the process. However, she was a little free this afternoon. Yanghua took a car to a coffee shop in Dongcheng. Pushing open the patterned glass door, Poplar Fruit looked around and saw a familiar figure. He paused for a moment and walked over steadily. Yujie. Poplar Fruit greeted and sat down with a smile. That's right, the neat white-collared beauty opposite him was Zheng Yujie. She was supposed to be in Yangcheng. But recently, New Translation Road publishing firm was pushing for a reform in the translation industry. So Zheng Yujie temporarily stayed in Beijing to discuss the details with the Translation Association. To be honest, if it was about the details, there was no need for Zheng Yujie to personally discuss it. However, she happened to be in the capital to visit and take care of her sick grandfather, so she stayed behind. How is Grandpa Zheng? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. When he first came to the capital, he went to visit, but the Zheng family did not treat him well. Zheng Taiming used to have a good relationship with him, but this time, he looked at Poplar Fruit as if he was looking at Chen Shimi. After all, the relationship between Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie had always been unclear. Zheng Yujie had fallen out with her family many times because of him, but Poplar Fruit still did not appreciate it. Old Master Zheng, on the other hand, was more open-minded. He asked about Poplar Fruit's academic and educational development and praised him. Of course, he also encouraged and taught him. He's fine, Zheng Yujie smiled and said. Poplar Fruit nodded and said, he's old and weak. He'll be fine after a period of rest. You're looking for me because you have something to say, right? Zheng Yujie did not chat too much with Poplar Fruit, and went straight to the point. She had always been a straightforward person. Although she had been in charge of the publishing firm for a few years, and her easily offended character had been honed, she still put down her guard in front of Poplar Fruit, and returned to being herself. Poplar Fruit paused. It wasn't that he was frightened by Zheng Yujie, but he didn't know what to say next. He had an appointment with Zheng Yujie today. In fact, even if Zheng Yujie wasn't in Beijing, Poplar Fruit would still talk to Zheng Yujie when he returned to Yangcheng. Zheng Yujie raised her brows slightly, and her charming phoenix eyes met Poplar Fruit's gaze. However, when she saw the serious expression on Poplar Fruit's face, her pupils constricted. "I'm getting married." Poplar Fruit finally said this sentence. Poplar Fruit's lips moved slightly, but his voice was like the chiming of an ancient bell in a temple. It was also like a huge wave on the beach, drowning Zheng Yujie. It was as if everything had sunk into silence. Zheng Yujie opened her mouth, but she couldn't say a word. She couldn't hear any sound either. The voice in her heart became louder and louder. "He's getting married, he's getting married. That's right, but the bride isn't me." Zheng Yujie snapped out of her daze and saw Poplar Fruit standing by her side, looking at her with concern. His eyes were filled with worry and concern, but they were as warm as ever. "Are you all right?" Poplar Fruit saw that Zheng Yujie had regained her senses, but the disappointment in her eyes couldn't be concealed. In the end, he was still too cruel to her. Poplar Fruit wouldn't deny that he did have special feelings for Zheng Yujie. And Zheng Yujie, after all these years, was unwilling to give up on her feelings for him. Poplar Fruit was deeply touched. But Poplar Fruit couldn't give up on his feelings for Fang Beibei. Fang Beibei and Zheng Yujie were the same. They were both very good to him. The feelings between the two of them weren't husband and wife, but it had long surpassed the category of husband and wife. If there wasn't Fang Beibei, Poplar Fruit would definitely choose Zheng Yujie. Unfortunately, since there was Fang Beibei, why would there be another Zheng Yujie? And it's Xiaohan's fault. Xiaohan deserves to die 1,000 times. Poplar Fruit wasn't a heartless person. The things he did, the promises he made, and the people he loved, he would take responsibility for them to the end. This was the same as what Poplar Fruit and Kiki had said. He was full of guilt towards Zheng Yujie. It seemed that he couldn't make it up to her in this life. Poplar Fruit cherished the peaceful and happy days he had with Fang Beibei. He couldn't be separated from Fang Beibei. "Has it been decided?" Zheng Yujie smiled sadly. The charm at the corner of her eyes had long been replaced by sadness. "Not yet. I'm preparing to formally propose during the graduation ceremony," Poplar Fruit said softly. Poplar Fruit had been preparing for this plan for more than a month. "That means it hasn't been decided yet." Zheng Yujie's eyes flashed with a glimmer of hope. "No, it's basically confirmed." Poplar Fruit was a little anxious at first, but his tone gradually softened. He said softly, "Yujie, you know that Beibei and I have long been engaged." Zheng Yujie's tears were like golden beans. They wouldn't fall easily, but at this moment, they couldn't help but roll down her smooth jade-like cheeks. Zheng Yujie still had that cold and elegant expression. She slightly raised her delicate chin, as if she wanted to hold back the tears that were about to fall. "Why are you so cruel to me? You don't give me any hope." Zheng Yujie didn't ask or question. She just murmured softly, "Hope." Poplar Fruit sighed and said somewhat sadly, "If there was really hope, why would I be so frank with you? Yujie, you know, I don't want you to continue. Don't say any more." Zheng Yujie suddenly stood up. 2 lines of tears were already flowing down like a broken dam. She said coldly, "I don't want to listen to your explanation, and I don't want to see you again." After saying that, Zheng Yujie looked deeply at Poplar Fruit. She closed her eyes in pain and turned to leave. Poplar Fruit moved, but in the end he still sat down dejectedly in his seat. His beloved had already floated away. In the end, did they still break up? How is that possible? Zheng Yujie still has a lot to do. Even if Xiaohan gets beaten up by everyone, he will still seek justice for Zheng Yujie. Chapter 13:12. Dad, Mom, why are you crying? Fang Beibei asked curiously as she hugged her mother and wiped her tears. It was supposed to be a happy atmosphere. They were all smiles and proud of their daughter. Why were they crying? No, Mom is happy. Mother Fang wiped her tears and smiled. I was worried about you, but seeing you so happy today, Mom is finally relieved. That's right. When Poplar Fruit came to visit, Father Fang and Mother Fang did not treat him well. A few days ago, Mother Fang had not let go of her prejudice against Yang Gua. She felt that her daughter was talented, beautiful, smart, and cute. She could have married anyone, but she just had to marry someone who had a family to feed. But yesterday, Poplar Fruit had called them for a long time and told them about today's plan. Mother Fong had finally let go of her prejudice and re-evaluated her future son-in-law. Seeing was believing. Mother Fong had observed Poplar Fruit for the past few years. Even if she still had her prejudice, she could not ignore Poplar Fruit's excellence. Now that she thought about it, other than having a daughter, Poplar Fruit was indeed the best candidate for a son-in-law. Of course, when they saw Fong Beibei snuggling happily with Poplar Fruit, and how Poplar Fruit lovingly wiped her sweat, Mother Fong and Father Fong said, "Old Fong, we are marrying our daughter off today." Perhaps it was still too early for them to get married, but when they thought that their daughter had finally found her happiness, and found a man she could rely on for the rest of her life, Mother Fong and Father Fong could not help but cry. Their daughter's 20-odd years were like a slideshow flashing before their eyes. Because of this, Mother Fong almost spilled the beans, scaring Poplar Fruit. Fortunately, Father Fong was there to smooth things over. "Beibei, what your mother means is that it was not easy to raise you for 20-odd years. Today she is very happy to see that you have graduated from university." Mom. Fong Beibei was touched as well. She hugged Mother Fong with tears in her eyes. Okay, don't cry. Today is a big day." Mrs. Fong patted Fong Beibei's hand and smiled. "Go and get ready." After bidding farewell to Fong Beibei and the others, Poplar Fruit held Kiki's hand and brought her parents around the campus. Estimating that it was almost time for their graduation ceremony, Poplar Fruit brought them in. Of course, they didn't enter the venue with the graduates. They walked directly to the viewing platform on the second floor. Here. Fortunately, Wang Yuba had come over in advance and risked his life to save a seat for them. Father and Mother Fong sat down in a seat with a good vantage point, while Mother Fong hugged Kiki. "Kiki, Dad still has something to do. Be good and stay with Grandma, okay?" Poplar Fruit entrusted his daughter to Father and Mother Fong. He also entrusted Father and Mother Fong to Wang Yuba. "Yuba, I'll leave the upstairs to you." Poplar Fruit patted Wang Yuba's shoulder. He paused for a moment then said, "Help me film more." "Brother, don't worry. Even if I can't get a good shot, we can ask the school's publicity center for a videotape." Wang Yuba chuckled and pointed at the several cameras in the hall, which looked like a gala. There was even a rocker camera in the middle. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit was delighted. The school's lineup for the graduation ceremony was very strong. Just like Wang Yuba said, they could record the entire process from multiple angles. Even Poplar Fruit hoped that his best moment could be clearly recorded. Of course, this made Poplar Fruit somewhat nervous. What if he made a mistake in front of so many people? Poplar Fruit suddenly smiled brightly. Mistake? How could that be possible? He bid farewell to Kiki and Mother Fong, but he didn't leave the hall. Instead, he went to a mysterious little dark room. On the first floor, the graduates entered the hall one after another. In addition to a large number of undergraduate students, there were also a few masters and doctoral graduates. Students from the two schools entered together. After they were seated, there was a waiting period. During this time, the director's camera feed would be played on both sides of the big screen. It felt like watching a live broadcast. Of course, as Higashiyama University's annual graduation ceremony, the cameras began to capture the male and female students sitting together. Many of them were couples. If they were captured, they would have to act intimately in front of everyone, or kiss. Of course, this was voluntary. It didn't matter if they didn't want to. Fong Beibei wasn't very interested in this small program. In the past, when she and Poplar Fruit watched a Lakers game, they were captured by the cameras. Moreover, Poplar Fruit wasn't by her side now. Fong Beibei deliberately looked upstairs. At first, she only saw Wang Yuba. She waved to Lin Xingshan, and then Kiki, Mother Fong, and Father Fong appeared in her field of vision. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't there. "Where's Uncle?" Fong Beibei suddenly felt a little lost when she couldn't see him. Maybe he went out to buy water? However, the graduation ceremony was about to begin soon. Fong Beibei couldn't continue to let her imagination run wild. Next to the stage, the host didn't walk up. Instead, he directly read out the process of the graduation ceremony. The first segment was the entrance of Higashiyama University's scepter. Everyone looked back and saw that the quaint door was opened. The professor, who was also wearing a special robe, walked in. The first one to walk was Academician Panfeng, a retired professor from the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. He walked very steadily, smiled slightly, and held Higashiyama University's scepter high with both hands, as if he was the unyielding intellectual backbone of the university. At the same time, the familiar school song sounded in the venue. White clouds are high, Pearl River is long, our university stands tall, for the glory of the nation. The school song that had been sung for hundreds of years was still inspiring. Every student who was about to graduate was so excited that their scalps tingled. They couldn't help but stick out their chests. Feng Beibei also looked at Academician Panfeng excitedly. He was the author of many academic books that she had read. He was a legend in the school. Only when the old academician walked past her did Feng Beibei feel a little better. She had time to look at the principal, dean, and other professors behind her. Wait a minute. Feng Beibei was stunned when she saw a familiar figure floating in front of her. Poplar Fruit. Wasn't he wearing casual clothes? And shorts? When did he change into a professor's robe and leather shoes? Also, why was he in the group of professors? Feng Beibei was stunned. All that was left in her mind was Poplar Fruit's sly smile when he looked at her when he floated by. Hey, isn't that old Yang from your family? Why is he there? Lu Ruhua, who was also sitting next to Feng Beibei, pretended to be surprised. However, she was holding back her laughter and secretly looking at Feng Beibei's expression. Yes. Why is Poplar Fruit in the group? Chapter 13:13. Why would Poplar Fruit be sitting on the stage? Not everyone was qualified to be the head of the ceremony. In addition to the position in the school, the professor also had to have an academic status. For large schools, there were basically only professors. For example, Feng Beibei's mathematics school was like this. For smaller schools or schools that were established recently, it was common for professors and associate professors to go on stage together. However, Poplar Fruit was not even an associate professor. He was only a lecturer. With such a young face, he stood out among the professors who were generally in their 40s or 50s. Feng Beibei's dilemma was not about Poplar Fruit's identity, but why didn't Poplar Fruit tell her anything before this? Yang Guo wasn't like this in the past. If there was anything, she would basically tell her. Why did he hide it from her during such an important celebration? Feng Beibei suddenly felt a little worried. Although Poplar Fruit should have his reasons, Feng Beibei was still a little nervous. After a while, Lin Xingshan suddenly came over and said to Feng Beibei, "Wow, Beibei, so your family's son is attending today as a specially invited alumnus?" Yes. If Poplar Fruit was not attending as a specially invited alumnus, what other identity could he have? There were many professors in the School of Foreign Languages. A young guy who was not even an associate professor could not occupy the position of an old professor, right? Feng Beibei came back to her senses and looked at the stage. The principal was introducing Poplar Fruit's resume. While she was worrying about her gains and losses, the principal had already given a speech. Next was Poplar Fruit's speech. Originally, the host was supposed to introduce Poplar Fruit. However, the principal excitedly took the lead. Although this was not the first time, it could be seen that the principal valued Poplar Fruit. In the introduction, Poplar Fruit's previous official position was not conspicuous, excluding the shareholders of New Translation Road. This was a secret. However, a series of achievements blinded the audience. The global bestsellers, the Nobel Prize in Literature winners, Poplar Fruit played a significant role behind the scenes. The remote education he advocated had begun to benefit millions of children all over the country, including the poorest and most backward African continent. Of course, Poplar Fruit himself was also a philanthropist. He donated hundreds of millions of yuan to a charity fund. Even among the rich, he was dazzling. In addition to this, the principal solemnly introduced Poplar Fruit's academic achievements. A revolutionary breakthrough. The principal used such words to praise Poplar Fruit's contribution. Then, the principal happily announced that Poplar Fruit had been hired by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a special interpreter. It sounded nice, but it was actually a temporary job. He had also been invited to the Tiananmen rostrum to cooperate with the translation work for the military parade. The former was not a big deal at Higashiyama University. After all, there were still many professors at Higashiyama University who received special subsidies from the state council. However, to be on the viewing platform for the military parade was a big deal. The Tiananmen rostrum was an important place for national leaders and major foreign guests to watch the ceremony. One had to know that there were only a few people in the country who could stand there. Even Zheng Yujia's father, the leader of Guangdong province, was not qualified. The principal was still very capable. After such a shocking piece of news, before everyone could recover from their shock and admiration, he announced another piece of explosive news. Poplar Fruit had been hired as the head of the newly opened Department of Eurasian Languages in the School of Foreign Languages. At the age of 27, he was the head of the department. This really broke Higashiyama University's record. If the principal had announced this announcement first, it would have definitely caused an uproar. After all, Poplar Fruit was too young. However, after the principal announced the more shocking news of the military parade, everyone suddenly felt that Poplar Fruit was the right person to be the head of the department. He was a real genius, a real great scholar. To be promoted by an exception was also because the school had a good eye for talent. However, Fang Beibei was not shocked. She had already known about these things. Poplar Fruit had told her immediately. But why didn't he say anything today? This was something that Fang Beibei could not understand. However, Poplar Fruit's next speech as a specially invited alumnus made Fang Beibei blush. The theme of Poplar Fruit's speech was actually more relaxed. Remember love in your heart. He used his own experience to tell everyone to cherish the past, the present, and the future. Cherishing the past meant cherishing the time on campus, and keeping in touch with the students and teachers on campus. This was not only the biggest network for them to enter society, but also a good time that they would remember for the rest of their lives. After all, the 4 years in college were the most unrestrained and crazy time in their lives to pursue love. Cherish the present, and do not give up easily. Whether it was a boy or a girl, they had to fight for love. Take advantage of this time when they were not afraid of losing, and strive to win a good future for themselves and their loved ones. Cherishing the future meant cherishing their health. With health, there would be a future. This theme was very simple and very old. However, in Poplar Fruit's narration combined with reality, there seemed to be a new understanding. In the first 2 parts of Poplar Fruit's speech, he repeatedly mentioned Fang Beibei. How many students in Higashiyama University didn't know about this famous person from a few years ago? Even until now, when the news media talked about the campus bell, didn't they often mention Fang Beibei from Higashiyama University and Sister Milk Tea from Shuemu University? Fang Beibei's face was red. She heard Poplar Fruit's speech and put her love for him in a very important position. It was because of Fang Beibei's love and support for him that Poplar Fruit was able to put in more time and effort. Poplar Fruit even thought that without Fang Beibei, he would not have been able to achieve what he had today. This was the meaning of cherishing the present. Although Poplar Fruit really wanted to tell the college students facing the difficult moment of graduation that there is only hope if you persevere, when he mentioned Fang Beibei in his speech and looked tenderly at Fang Beibei in the audience from time to time, he made eye contact with her. The recording director put this scene on the 2 big screens on both sides of the stage, causing the students to laugh in unison. It was not jeering, but more understanding laughter, envy, and blessings. Among the graduates present, there were many fans of Poplar Fruit. They took out their phones, took pictures of this warm scene, and quickly uploaded it to the evening. Netizens began to repost and comment, "Oh, the PDA has reached here." Being watched by the audience, Fang Beibei was a little shy. Her face was red, as if she was drunk, and her ears were red. However, her heart was overflowing with happiness. So Uncle did not tell me because he wanted to give me such a surprise. Chapter 13-14. Although it was a bit of a public display of affection, Poplar Fruit's speech still won the applause of the graduates from the 2 universities. In the past few years when he was in university, Yang Guo, who was in the same school as him, had always been the idol of many students. Now, after listening to Poplar Fruit's speech, everyone felt that Poplar Fruit was actually the same as them in the beginning. They both came from university and were confused about society. If Poplar Fruit could do so well, they might be able to be like Poplar Fruit if they worked hard. Therefore, at the end of Poplar Fruit's speech, the enthusiasm of the whole audience was almost ignited. The graduates in gowns below the stage were excited, clapping their hands and cheering for their youth. Your man is quite awesome. His speech is so passionate. Lu Ruhua was from the northeast, and always spoke in a domineering manner. Feng Beibei smiled and did not refute. She fanned herself with her degree cap. The gown was too hot, and proudly puffed out her chest. Her mood of being unhappy because Poplar Fruit hid it from her had already disappeared. Of course, after Poplar Fruit's speech, the graduation ceremony continued. And this time, it was the most important part of the degree conferment ceremony. The undergraduate, master's, and doctoral graduates went on stage one by one, shook hands with the principal, and received their graduation certificates and degree certificates from the principal. This part was somewhat ironic. After all, for most students, after 4 years in the university, they had only seen the principal twice, the entrance ceremony and the graduation ceremony. Being in close contact with the principal, and even shaking hands with him, was probably the only time in their lives. Feng Beibei was a little nervous, because she was clever and cute, and had prepared a small program for the principal early. This was different from her roommates simply asking for a hug. Feng Beibei secretly thought about it for a long time, and of course she also discussed it with Poplar Fruit at home. It was not the first time that the principal was flirted with during a handshake. As early as 2 years ago, when shaking hands with the principal, a student made a peace sign, and this photo caused a sensation on the internet. The netizens joked that this was a rock, paper, scissors, that the principal could never win. With this kind of feeling, Feng Beibei waited in line. The line in front of her was getting shorter and shorter, and soon it would be her turn. Because she was nervous, she did not notice that Poplar Fruit on stage was also a little nervous. He secretly took out a small box from his pocket and hid it under the sleeve of his doctor's robe. Feng Beibei's 2 roommates, Lin Xingshan and Lu Ruhua, followed the previous agreement and sandwiched Feng Beibei in the middle. Lin Xingshan went on stage first, and after completing her ceremony, she would quickly walk down to make room for Feng Beibei to go up. When it was Lu Ruhua's turn, Lu Ruhua would slow down a step and separate the crowd behind her, leaving room for Poplar Fruit and the rest on stage. Feng Beibei did not know this. She just watched Lin Xingshan go on stage with her little heart pounding. She silently repeated her little thoughts in her heart, afraid that she would go blank and forget when she went up. Finally, Lin Xingshan shook hands with the principal and walked down the stage. The MC below the stage read out Feng Beibei's name. Feng Beibei was also a spontaneous person. She was nervous below the stage, but when she went up on stage, she calmed down. She secretly glanced at Poplar Fruit. And before they could make eye contact, Feng Beibei walked to the principal. Although she was not nervous, Feng Beibei still did not dare to look at the principal. She did not notice the admiration in the principal's eyes. Of course, the principal knew her. Of course, it was because of Poplar Fruit. However, Feng Beibei was still a little famous herself. She had won the first prize in 2 international competitions in a row, and she was even accepted as a disciple by a professor in the School of Mathematics. Feng Beibei, who had extraordinary talent in mathematics, was the treasure of the School of Mathematics. The principal, who was standing in the middle, smiled and reached out his right hand. According to the procedure, Feng Beibei should shake hands with the principal and take a photo as a souvenir. However, Feng Beibei did not reach out her hand. Instead, she twirled her academic gown like a skirt and spread it out like a fan. What was she doing? Feng Beibei's face was slightly red. She held back her laughter and imitated the ancient Western ladies. She took a step back with her left leg, bent her knees slightly, and did a dance move. It was very familiar. Wasn't this the response that the girls made when they were invited to dance in the Western costume ball? Wasn't the principal's outstretched hand the same as a gentleman's invitation? The graduates below the stage all laughed out loud. After the victory sign, there were many different handshakes with the principal. However, they had always been imitated and never surpassed. Today there was finally a classic photo. In the midst of everyone's laughter, Fong Beibei blushed shyly and shook hands with the principal. She took the certificate and was about to run off the stage. However, she was stopped by the principal. "Student Fong Beibei, please wait." This was the first time the principal stopped a student. Fong Beibei panicked. She thought that her rudeness had made the principal angry. She lowered her head in fear and turned around to follow the principal's instructions to stand in front of him. The whole venue was silent. Nobody knew when the melody of the school song had stopped. Everyone held their breaths. Those who did not know better would have thought that the principal was angry. In fact, the principal did not look like he was about to fly into a rage. He smiled and said into the microphone, "Student Fong Beibei, I asked you to stay because a student has a few important words to say to you. Are you willing to listen to him patiently?" The audience below the stage had already started to exclaim, because they could see a person walking out from the main seat behind the stage. He had a tall and straight figure and a handsome and calm face. Poplar Fruit's appearance stunned everyone. Those who reacted quickly took out their phones. Yes, no matter what happened next, it would definitely be exciting. When Fong Beibei heard the principal's words, she was also stunned. She raised her head to look at the principal in surprise. However, from the corner of her eye, she could not help but turn her head. That familiar figure walked in front of her and seemed to cover her sky. No, it should be said that he became her sky. Because of Poplar Fruit's appearance, it was as if the entire venue of the graduation ceremony had lost its brilliance. Yes, in Fong Beibei's eyes, it was as such. "Uncle? Why is Uncle walking out at this time?" In just a short second, many thoughts flashed through Fong Beibei's mind. However, the principal's words, the microphone in Poplar Fruit's hand, and the gentle smile on his face made Fong Beibei's originally thumping heart race even faster. This time, she also seemed to have realized something. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.